So I'm going to go ahead and call to order this meeting of the 4th of March, 2021 City of Nashua Planning Board. Linda, can we get a roll call, please?
Mike Peterson,
Present at home alone.
Scott Leclaire,
Here and alone.
Adam Varley,
Here and alone.
Maggie Harper,
Here and alone.
Alderman David Tenza, Alderwoman Jan Schmidt, Dan Hudson,
Present and alone.
Ed Weber,
Here, and I have my grandkids and family in the next room, so they might pop their head in. So.
Bob Bollinger,
Here and alone.
Larry Hirsch.
Here and alone.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction here. Again, my name is Scott Leclaire. I'm the chair of the City of Nashua Planning Board. And again, this is the 4th of March, 2021 City of Nashua Planning Board meeting. As chair of the board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Sununu as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to executive order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note there's no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which has been authorized to meet electronically pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video conferencing. We are video conferencing utilizing Zoom. Public access to the meeting is provided via Zoom, and a link to the meeting was contained in the meeting agenda available on the city's website. The meeting can also be streamed to the city's website at www.nashuanh.gov/318/CTV on Nashua's community link. Public may also view the meeting on Comcast channel 16. Linda, could you mute? I think it's Sweeney, maybe. You're making background noise, so thanks. Number 2, we're providing public notice of the necessary information to access this meeting. 3, if anyone has any problem accessing the meeting, please call 603-589-3115, and they'll help you connect. Number 4, in the event the public is unable to access the meeting via the methods that I mentioned, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. I'm in control of this meeting, and to the extent practical and advisable, the board will follow the procedures as identified in its bylaws. This includes the applicant presenting their case, followed by questions by the board. We'll then allow for a rebuttal period as best as possible for persons wishing to speak in favor or opposition of, or have questions of the plans before the board then deliberates and determines an outcome. Applicants and their representatives and other individuals required to appear before the board are appearing remotely, and they are not required to be physically present. The applicants, their representatives, and other individuals required to appear before the board may have contacted the planning department to arrange alternative means of real-time participation if they're unable to use Zoom. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting will be done by a roll call vote. And planning board meetings will be held electronically until it has been deemed safe to conduct more typical meetings at City Hall. The board, the planning department, and the city thank everybody for their understanding and patience during this time. Okay, so for the board, we have in front of us some minutes from the February 18th, 2021 meeting. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at these minutes? I want to make a motion as to whether they're acceptable as written or if they require any amendments. From the board.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the February 18th, 2021 Nashua City Planning Board meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Bollinger to approve the minutes February 18th, 2021 as written. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? Could we get a roll call vote on that, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Farley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Dan Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Ballinger,
Yes.
and Larry Hirsch.
Oh,
And that motion passes 7-0 with one abstention.
Okay, thanks a lot. Next up, communications. So, Boylan.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I had sent out 3 emails this week. One email was engineering comments regarding 2 John and 21 East Hollis Street. The other email I sent out was also engineering comments for 15 Progress Ave. And then finally, I sent out an email with some renderings of the Renaissance project. And that is all.
Okay. All right. So next up, report of chairman, committee, and liaison. Anybody have any committee reports? Ed?
The TTAC and the Nashua Regional Planning Commission met. They went over transportation issues with the TTAC. And you see the other one, Nashua Regional Planning had some topics to go over. And that's about it.
Thanks, Ed. The only thing I have, I'll just report that there was a public meeting on the 2nd for the city's master plan. Pretty well attended. A bunch of topics discussed, and some breakout sessions took place around some of the goals and other things. I don't remember exact attendance, but it was I think up above 75 or so in that range. So, and the next public meeting, Matt, is what day?
April 6th at 6 p.m. that evening.
April 6th. And that one is specific to what, Matt?
That is specific to the Daniel Webster College redevelopment and also some corridor vision for the Daniel Webster corridor and the Amherst Street corridor as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So obviously that's some significant land use topics that would be good for folks from the board to attend. Yeah, you can sign up again at imaginenashua.com to follow up. And I don't think there's actual pre-registration for that one. You can show up that night. So, okay, moving on with our agenda. Again, just for those folks that are ready to present their case, we are going to hear first up on the agenda the other business, case number 2. We do have a concurrent meeting going on with our Planning and Economic Development Committee. We want to get through these 2 things early on to try and push forward some overall city work. So here we got other business, case number 2, referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed O-21-048, amending the residential district ordinance with respect to residential driveways. And Matt, are you going to present that to the board? Or?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try to be brief with these, as I know we have a good deal of business this evening. But as you mentioned, the PEDC is meeting concurrently, and they are anxiously awaiting the Planning Board's recommendation on these 2 referrals. The first of which, the driveway referral, the broad intent of which is a proposed modification to section 19017, currently codified in the National Land Use Code as residential districts, and proposed to be codified as residential districts and uses as part of the ordinance referral O-21-048. Speaking broadly, the intent of this proposed modification to the code is clarifying the applicability of the existing driveway standards, which are currently actually housed within the site plan review regulations, but have traditionally been applied to residential uses, and actually moving them into the residential portion of the code to make that relationship a little stronger moving forward. Again, there's a historical pattern of taking those site plan review regulation driveway standards and applying them to small single-family residential lots. However, we'd like to provide some clarification to that, and the best way to do so is to actually bring them into the residential portion of the ordinance 19017. Additionally, We're obviously creating a dedicated section that consolidates several sort of disparate portions of the ordinance. Again, that section of the site plan review regulations. There are some driveway standards within some of the public works authority, but because those live in different locations, we feel a need to consolidate them into one location again within this residential portion of the zoning code. Additionally, in doing that, really in working cooperatively with the engineering department, Dan Hudson, his team, the building department, fire department, and code enforcement, we actually are making some slight amendments to this to really ensure the continued safety of the traveling public and private property owners as well as part of that residential driveway permitting process. And just to briefly cover that, we are clarifying how driveway widths are measured to ensure that conflict points are minimized in corridors and along public ways. We're minimizing further access management impacts by making sure that close proximity to intersection driveways are carefully managed through the standards that you see included in the amendment before you. And then through some clear driveway approach standards, we're actually working to preserve adequate site distance and road access for multimodal users. So those are sort of the broad goals that are ultimately codified in the way that you've seen the modified ordinance in front of you this evening. I do want to note for the record that I would like to introduce an amendment to the proposal this evening. It's a very simple amendment, but I'm going to quickly share my screen so I can show you what the proposal is. And I would ask that if you consider a recommendation, that you consider this sort of the goldenrod copy, and that any such recommendation be based on this modification. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and show you the modification. It is quite simply to remove, and I've highlighted items 3 and 4, but it actually is to remove what's shown as item number 4 within the version that you've received, and that was the driveway throat length measurement. That specific dimensional standard is included elsewhere in the ordinance within the sort of the Public Works' authority. So we feel that that's adequately protected elsewhere. Additionally, the planning department's feeling was that the driveway throat length that we had included here could potentially create issues in some of our more urban areas, particularly on small lots where development is situated closer to the road, and that throat length would not be achieved, and we'd be seeing a lot of variances. So again, the proposed amendment is to remove item number 4, driveway throat length, thus making the driveway approach angle number 4 and the paving requirement item number 5 within this E section, as you see in the amended section. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Speaking broadly, again, I'm happy to address any comments from the board this evening, but I'd just like to reiterate these modifications are really clarifying in nature. They've been done in partnership with multiple departments within the city and are really intended to ensure that the best design practices for safety and security of driveway access are reflected during the permitting and construction process. Again, I would request that any action this evening does reflect that goldenrod copy, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Weber,
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
does this impact our sidewalk contribution in any way?
No, it does not. The only connection that I can see is by clarifying the way that the driveways are measured, it could potentially create more sidewalk area with this clarification. But it's circumstantial in that sense, so I don't believe there's a direct impact to the contribution itself, Mr. Weber.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the board?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think I might need some clarification for new language. E1. As I read it, driveways where they meet the public right-of-way and continuing to the rear line of the front yard setback shall be no more than 24 feet in width. Such width may be divided between 2 approaches to the right-of-way, but no more than 2. Does that mean that you could potentially have 2 driveways within that 24-foot width? So effectively 2 12-foot driveways occupying what would otherwise be required as a 24-foot? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Mr. Bollinger, you are, and I'll admit that's a bit of an oddity in our ordinance that we do permit the 2 egress points within close proximity to each other. Quite frankly, we're simply continuing the existing language of the ordinance in this regard. I believe there will be a more complete analysis of the safety aspect of this standard when we go through the land use recodification. But this is an existing standard in the ordinance, albeit a bit odd, I think, from a safety perspective, but it's something that we've been practicing historically.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Chair, if I may, I just would like to add, I do potentially have some issues with that. If we get into a larger, more developed area, where you literally have a curb cut potentially every 12 feet with motor vehicle conflicts. There is a potential safety concern there, and I guess irrespective of what the existing language says now, I would have some pause with having that be basically an ongoing feature of any site plans or otherwise that are potentially before the board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Anybody else from the board? Dan, your group has gone through all this pretty much, sounds like, so you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there's been a lot of confusions about the driveway regulations, how they're interpreted. I mean, this clarifies some things. The item that was just being discussed, I think the intent is to provide a maximum driveway width that, if there are multiple driveways, you don't have two 24-foot driveways or something to that effect. It's kind of setting a maximum driveway width so we don't have really wide driveways where they're not required. I do understand driveway spacing thing needs to be looked at, but yeah, we've working collaboratively with planning. We've talked this through, looked at the revised language, and I think this is an improvement. I think as the planning manager was saying, there is still room for improvement, and that may come in future revisions, but this is a good step in the right direction.
Thanks, Dan. As a matter of practice too, right, as in a residential development, the driveway construction is reviewed during the building permit process, right?
Yeah, so the driveway permits are
Yeah.
issued through engineering, but yeah, and we're also working on that. I mean,
Yeah.
sewer services are permitted through engineering, but it all goes together with the building effort.
Yeah.
So there's collaboration and coordination that we do between the permitting entities.
Right. Okay, thanks. Anybody else from the board? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion from the board?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
may I just raise a,
Yeah.
I believe that this should be treated as a public hearing. I know it's a bit odd, and perhaps that's
Oh,
not how the
okay.
board has treated it in the past, but
Yeah.
I would ask for the record that you open the meeting
Sure.
to public comment if there is any.
Sure. I can do that.
Thank you.
I guess at this point, I'll go ahead and open to the public. Does anybody in the public listening in want to make a comment or ask a question? Go ahead and unmute, state your name and address for record, please. Okay, not hearing any. I'll go ahead and go back to the board. Anybody want to make a motion regarding this referral? Mr. Varley?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that the board provide a favorable recommendation with respect to this ordinance before us, O-21-048, with the changes that Mr. Sullivan had indicated, specifically in section E, removing the current subsection 4 and then renumbering the remaining subsections. And with that, as I said, I would suggest that the board make a favorable recommendation.
Okay, so we have that motion by Mr. Varley as stated. Do we have a second on it?
Second, Weber.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? Okay, let's get a roll vote on that, please.
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Dan Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Can hear you, Ed.
I didn't hear my name clearly. It broke up. Everything seems to be breaking up. So yes.
Thanks.
Bob Hollinger,
Yes.
and Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 8-0.
Okay, great, thanks. Next up, referral from Board of Aldermen on proposed O-21-049, amending conservation subdivision supplemental use regulations. So Matt, you want to talk on that one?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would refer to Director Marchand's memo included within the packet that does review this issue quite concisely, dated February 2nd, 2021. But this is a proposed amendment to section 19040, conservation subdivisions within the National Land Use Code. The proposed modification quite simply inserts a statement to allow for multiple principal structures on a lot within conservation subdivisions only. I want to make sure I emphasize that here. It's in conservation subdivisions only that would come before this board. The simple reasoning for this modification is to provide options for ownership with conservation subdivisions outside of the traditional sort of multiple lot configuration that you would see with a subdivision. There's a varied history of interpretation, quite frankly, on this matter. In some cases, there have been cases approved where there are multiple structures on common lots. In other cases, there have been proposals that have been approved with individual lots for each single family detached dwelling. And like the prior amendment that you considered, this is simply a clarification to that and adds some very clear permissive language within the conservation subdivision ordinance. We are seeing an increased interest in this type of development, again, with sort of the condoized structure of a large common lot and single family detached units that would appear in many ways to be a traditional single family style development. And as a result, we see a need to offer that additional option within this ordinance. I would note for the record that the Housing for Older Persons ordinance included in the Land Use Code includes this permissive language just as it's indicated in this amendment here, that again allows for multiple principal structures on a single lot. I would note for the record, though, that the proposed amendment, although it does allow for these multiple structures on a lot, it has no impact on the design, character, or natural resource impact of the conservation subdivision. And the reason for that is that ultimately the conservation subdivision ordinance is based on the net development density of a parent tract of land, and therefore does not consider the minimum lot size requirement when an application comes forward. Therefore, allowing multiple units on a lot, they'll still be held to the same threshold of density that they would traditionally. So although we are adding this in, making it seemingly more permissive, the density remains the same with any conservation subdivision proposal that comes forward. In closing, I would just say that we believe that this modification is consistent with the purpose statement of the conservation subdivision ordinance. It doesn't undermine the intent in any way of any other provisions of the ordinance, including the open space requirements and the like. It obviously forwards the concept of an increased density allowance and natural resource protection and the balancing act that occurs there. And lastly, it does provide an additional option for housing flexibility that we know that the city is desperately in need of and has prioritized. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'd be happy to answer specific questions about this, but the amendment that you do have in front of you is the most recent version available.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Anybody from the board have any questions on this?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
When they say multiple structures, are you talking about putting like tiny houses in a yard, that kind of thing?
So I would just point out, the short answer is yes. It could be small houses. I would just be cautious with the terminology, tiny houses, Mr. Peterson, in the sense that the building code does allow for very small homes to be constructed. If we're referring to tiny houses on wheels, those would not be permitted today by right anyway. But certainly someone could propose very small homes. However, that's very unlikely because they'd be held to the same net development density. And from the development perspective, obviously, it's more advantageous to build a larger home, which can be sold for more money, rather than smaller homes that would be held to the same density standard as a larger home. So the short answer is, yes, it would allow it, but the existing ordinance does as well, and provide that they're actually small homes and not tiny houses on wheels.
Thank you. I was thinking like somebody builds a small in-law apartment in their backyard with a small structure domicile.
So that's a great point. In the event that a detached structure is built with dwelling space within it, it would be treated as a unit in the context of development density, and any such construction would ultimately, bite into, if you will, the net development density of a certain parent tract. So could that be done? Yes, it could, but it would be subject to all of the provisions of the ordinance as they exist today.
And Matt, maybe if I could just add to that, because I do think we've had some examples of this before on the board where a developer is proposing a single lot. So, effectively condo ownership, right? And so, but it may be, as Matt was describing, there are 10 housing units on that single lot instead of subdividing the lot into 10 lots, right? And so I think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's sort of the primary driving force behind the change is to permit that sort of single lot constitution where you have then, 10 what would look like single family houses on one lot.
Yeah, Mr. Varley, that's exactly correct. Again, it doesn't impact the character. We expect to see the same development even if this change is passed. But it really does get to that sort of shift in housing preference that's happened. There's a lot of interest in that condo-wise style single family detached housing. And that's why I think we're seeing a slight push in this direction.
Other questions by the board?
Mr. Chair.
Ballinger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess with respect to the net development density, I guess if I was looking at this from above, from plan view, I realize, a certain percentage has to be conservation area, but does this ordinance address the fact, would you be allowed to build up as opposed to build out? So in other words, would you be able to have multi-floor, multi-tenant buildings within the R40, R18, R9? And that, I'll let you address that one first. And there may be a follow-up depending on the answer. So
I'm going to give a partial cop-out answer, Mr. Ballinger, in the sense that I would say that it will ultimately be controlled by the permitted uses within the underlying zoning district. So it depends, in which zoning district we're talking about, whether a multifamily configuration would be permitted versus single-family homes only. So I hope that answers that portion of your question. I would say, though, we're having some discussions about that very question right now and what the intent of the conservation subdivision ordinance is. I can say confidently it allows for single-family home construction, but we are doing some investigative work on whether or not additional types of development would be permitted under the ordinance as it exists today.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Chair, follow-up?
Sure.
I guess if it were to get to that point, I would be concerned whether or not the spirit and intent of the conservation development was really being met. To be honest with you, one could interpret this as potentially an end run around traditional residential zoning. I guess my concern is, would it have been more straightforward or candid if the Board of Aldermen proposed eliminating R40, R18, R9, rather than trying to sort of backtrack into a more robust development scenario? I guess this is where I'm seeing this line. It looks like there's only one line added, but it looks like you're sort of opening the door here for something that maybe it wasn't intended for. And if I'm reading too much into it, so be it. But I'm thinking of a few large undeveloped parcels in the city, particularly the Southwest. You've got the Flatley area. I understand we see applications all the time for subdividing one small lot into two small lots. I don't think that's really what we're talking about here, but I've got some general concerns about whether or not this, again, is really sort of contrary to traditional residential zoning.
Mr. Chair, may I just respond to that?
Sure. Yep.
So, Mr. Ballinger, I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's one, and I hesitate to kick this sort of proverbial can towards the land use code update, but I think you're asking the right question. I would say that the proposed amendment that's before you tonight does not impact the answer to that question, though, because regardless, the conservation subdivision is intended in some ways to be an end around to the traditional subdivision development with a minimum lot size structure. It is intended to cluster development, provide additional density in what ultimately may be different from a traditional development scenario, but is providing additional natural resource protection. So it is in some ways exactly what you're saying, and that is it's an alternative form of development. It does provide an alternative, is what I would call it, to the traditional style of subdivision development. And I think it's a great question to ask about whether or not that type of development is something that's consistent with the vision for the community moving forward, particularly in those areas that you reference. But the change before you this evening, I would argue, and I feel confidently, it does not impact the answer to that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Other questions by the board? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public. Is there anybody in the public wishing to ask a question of this proposed ordinance revision? Go ahead and state your name and address for record and unmute, please. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. Any other questions by the board? Hearing none, would somebody like to make a motion on this referral? Somebody from the board. Mr. Varley?
All right, I thought Mr. Weber looked like he was maybe getting ready to make a motion, so.
Go ahead.
I will make a motion that the board provide a favorable recommendation with respect to O-21-049 with respect to the proposed amendment to section 190-40 conservation subdivisions, and that we transmit that favorable recommendation to the Board of Aldermen.
Yes, we have that motion for favorable recommendation or referral from Mr. Varley. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? Okay, let's get a roll vote on that, please.
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Varley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Ballinger,
No.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
That motion passes 7-1.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. We're going to go ahead and move back to our standard agenda here now. Thank everybody for their patience here. Next up, old business conditional special use permits, there are none. Old business subdivision plans, there are none. Old business site plans, there are none. New business conditional special use permits, there are none. New business subdivision plans, there are none. New business site plans, this is case A21-0016, JC Land and Equipment Enterprises LLC owner, Sweeney Metal Fabricators Inc. applicant. This is an application and acceptance of proposed 7,716 square foot building addition and accompanying site improvements. This property is located at 15 Progress Avenue. Has anybody from the board had a chance to take a look at this application and want to make a motion as to whether it's complete and ready for us to take jurisdiction?
Weber, so moved.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Weber to take jurisdiction of A21-0016. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion on that? Okay, can we get a roll vote on the jurisdiction?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Varley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Ballinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
That motion passes 8-0.
Okay, thanks. Do we have somebody here from the applicant that wants to present?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Tom Zajac. I'm a civil engineer with Hayner Swanson, 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. Joining me here tonight are Chris and John Sweeney from Sweeney Metal Fabricators, the owner and applicant for this project. We're here tonight seeking site plan application acceptance and final approval for proposed 1-story, roughly 7,700 square foot building addition, along with associated site improvements. I'd like to just provide a brief presentation, after which be happy to answer any questions from either the board or the public.
That'd be great, thanks.
If it's okay, I'd just like to share my screen.
Yep. Go ahead.
Everybody see that okay?
Looks like it's coming. Yep, we got it now. I do at least. Yeah. Go ahead.
All set?
Yep.
Okay. Existing site, 15 Progress Ave. It's about an 1.5 acre site located in an industrial park area, zone PI Park Industrial. Direct abutters to the site include a number of industrial uses, including J. Lawrence Hall, McLaughlin Transportation Systems, College Bound Movers, Nashua Marine, amongst others. Sweeney Metal Fabricators provides machining, welding, and fabrication services and has been in business at this location for over 25 years. The existing site contains a 1-story, 12,800 square foot building that was built back in the the early 60s, along with associated parking and loading areas that you see today. Access to the site is provided via 2 existing curb cuts, one to the north along Progress Ave and one to the south. The site is currently serviced by a private septic system, water by Pennachuck Waterworks, gas and overhead electric and telecommunications utilities. The topography of the site is relatively flat. It generally drains in an easterly direction towards Progress Ave. And there are no drainage or stormwater management systems that exist on site except for one singular leaching catch basin located in this loading area to the north where my cursor is. So tonight we're here to discuss a proposed 1-story, 7,716 square foot building addition on the south side of the existing building, along with associated site improvements. It's worth noting that back in 1975, a site plan for a similar sized building addition and parking and loading expansion was approved by the planning board, but of course was never constructed. The proposed building addition will measure approximately 154 feet by 50 feet and will provide additional machine shop space for Sweeney's growing business operations. There will be one at-grade loading area along the proposed addition where my cursor is here. As you can see, we're expanding parking along the rear of the property to a net gain of 12 spaces for Sweeney's customers and employees. We're also providing 2 oversized truck parking spaces to accommodate company vehicles. Those are located here where my cursor is on the screen. We've widened the drive aisles and access ways and relocated the southerly driveway in this location to accommodate both the trucks that the Sweeney business expects to see, along with providing adequate life safety access and maneuvering on site. Other site improvements include new curbing, an updated ADA accessible parking, sidewalk improvements along the front of the site on Progress Ave, landscaping, building mounted lighting, and stormwater management. With regards to utilities, it is proposed to eliminate the existing septic system and leach field that currently services the existing building, and we're proposing to construct a new gravity sewer system that will tie into the existing public sewer that's located about 150 feet south of our site. You can see on the plan, this dark hatched area here shows the approximate limits of that work. Existing fire protection service will need to be slightly relocated on site from where it exists today. Existing domestic water, gas, electric, telecommunication, utility services are to remain as they exist today. With regards to traffic, a traffic impact memo and TIR worksheet was prepared by the project's traffic consultant, and it was included in the site plan application package. In summary, the project will result in minimal impacts and no further study was warranted in regards to traffic. With regards to stormwater, as I mentioned, the existing site is mostly developed with little to no drainage or stormwater management practices, except for that leaching catch basin I mentioned. The vast majority of the drainage drains directly out to Progress Ave. This redevelopment project does provide a great opportunity to significantly improve things from a drainage perspective compared to the existing condition. So runoff from the redevelopment portions of the site, including the new pavement area, the proposed building addition rooftop, as well as a portion of the existing building rooftop, will be captured via curbing, catch basins, and roof drains and directed into one of two stormwater management areas that we're proposing on site. Stormwater management A, as it's shown on the plan, is an underground infiltration system, a storm tech system that I'm sure you folks are all familiar with. It's going to be located within the relocated southerly driveway just south of the building. There's a second practice, a surface infiltration basin that's going to be located in this area of the site in the rear, just adjacent to the new rear parking spaces. It's also worth noting that the existing site receives a fairly large contribution from the adjacent property to the south, J. Lawrence Hall. Their back rooftop area really drains in a northerly direction, really along our common lot line, and does spill over in the existing condition onto our driveway. So in working with that property owner, we're going to be doing some minor grading and shaping of the land to create a conveyance swale along that common property line. We're also proposing a leaching catch basin in that area to provide some storage and infiltration during the smaller storm events, which will certainly improve things with regards to that runoff compared to what's out there today. So as a result of all these improvements, the proposed project will result in a significant decrease in peak flows, leaving the site and entering Progress Ave in the city's drainage system. Mr. Chair, we do have one waiver request, a site plan waiver request item tonight. I'd like to paraphrase my waiver letter dated February 16th, 2021. We're seeking a waiver from section 190-170, which is the non-residential building design regulations, as it relates to facades, roofing, and entryways. Our experience is that this type of waiver request is fairly common for industrial buildings, and more so for industrial building additions. Oftentimes they're matching existing buildings and are located within industrial parks. The existing building was built in the early 1960s, which far preceded these regulations. Our design intent is for the addition is to match the existing building and to meet the form and function for an industrial use, in this case being a machine shop. The building addition will result in a 155-foot uninterrupted facade along the south or side elevation, where my cursor is here along the proposed building addition, as well as a 200-foot uninterrupted facade along the north or rear, which includes both the proposed addition and the existing building to create that 200-foot facade. The regulations state that a maximum uninterrupted facade shall be 150 feet. The addition will also contain a flat roof that will match the existing building and other buildings located within the industrial park. The existing customer entrance will remain as it exists today. Therefore, the proposed addition does not comply with the entryways portion of that regulation. We do want to mention that the addition will be in compliance as it relates to exterior materials, colors, and screening of mechanical rooftop units. In summary, we feel that this project is being redeveloped in a responsible manner and complies with the site plan regulations. We've reviewed the staff report and are okay with the suggested conditions. We did receive engineering comments earlier this week. Therefore, we're not able to formally address those comments prior to this meeting. However, I have reviewed the comments with my client, and given the minor nature of this project, we are certainly confident that we're able to address those comments that you see listed to the satisfaction of the engineering department going forward. So, in summary, Mr. Chair, we're seeking your approval tonight, and Chris and I would be happy to answer any questions that you folks have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I will give it up to the board here. Anybody from the board have any questions regarding this application?
Weber,
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
upon visiting the site, I noticed that there's a few dumpsters that are open dumpsters. I wanted to get the what the applicant is going to do with those open dumpsters. Change
One of those dumpsters you're referring to is it's a scrap steel dumpster. I'd like to remain where it is. The remaining dumpsters would be moved within the building. Those are other scrap dumpsters that get picked up on a weekly basis.
Okay, the only reason I'm saying it's the one in the back, the open dumpster is not inside of public view per se. It's behind the building, so I don't have a problem with that, but there was an open dumpster on the northeast portion just forward of the new building where it is now. There's a dumpster there that's just, it's not enclosed or anything. My concern is that is in public view and it needs to be either enclosed or removed.
Are you referring to the garbage and recycling dumpsters on the corner of the property? Because if you are,
it's not in the back on that concrete pad. The one I saw was towards the northwest of the building when I was driving around the building.
that would be our general refuse and recycling dumpsters, and those would be enclosed by a fence per this plan.
Oh, I didn't see the enclosed on the plan. That's why. I'm sorry. No problem. That's great.
Yeah, Mr. Weber, it's located in the back corner where my cursor is here.
Okay, that's not the one I was referring to. There's one out front in front where it says 1-story addition over by there. There's a dumpster over in that area currently.
Is it a large 40-foot unit you're speaking of?
No, it isn't. It's probably 8 feet by 4 feet. Your typical, has 2 front doors on it. People just throw stuff in it.
Yeah, those are what we use those in processing. Those would be moved inside of the proposed addition. That's one of the reasons we need the more space.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Other questions by the board?
Yes, I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
My question for the applicant is, could you please describe your modifications for the septic sewer that will be done on this project?
Sure, absolutely. So the existing site, believe it or not, is serviced by an existing septic system. There's a existing septic tank located where my cursor is here, and approximate leach field located in this area here where the proposed building addition is going. So all that is going to come out, the septic tank, the leach field, given that it's within the building footprint. We're just going to tie right into that existing service. We're dropping a new manhole. We run straight out to the street, and as I mentioned, have about 150-foot gravity sewer extension at the top of the existing line in Progress Ave to tie in. So it's a fairly, once that existing septic system gets removed, it's a fairly straightforward tie-in from our perspective. There's plenty of pitch coming down Progress Ave to tie in.
Thank you.
Other questions by the board? Mr. Hudson.
Yeah, just further on that point, is that portion of sewer to be constructed in Progress Ave, is it your intention that that would become public sewer to the manhole in the street?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions by the board?
Mr. Chair?
Yep, Mr. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zajac, could you just address a little bit the driveway configuration, geometry, the new driveway, kind of the teardrop shape and what's going on there? And it looks like you've also sort of expanded beyond the setback envelope there. And if you could just kind of talk about that driveway a little bit.
Sure, Mr. Bollinger. I'd be happy to. As I mentioned, we were trying to balance a little bit some of the truck traffic that the Sweeney Group, envisions on this site, as well as providing adequate maneuvering for the fire marshal for the city's, life safety and access vehicles. You can see that, we're paving straight up to the building in this location. So in order for a vehicle to make that swing as they come around the corner, they do need a little more room there to make that tire swing. We have run turning templates here for a number of vehicles, including, the city's fire truck, ladder truck, and that additional space was needed there. Our original plans were submitted with that southerly driveway being a minimum of 16 feet wide. We were just seeking to kind of minimize pavement. The fire marshal asked that we widen that to a minimum of 20 feet. So we went ahead and widened that pavement directly against the building. But it's really to provide, we've got some one-way circulation in that location, and it's really to provide enough maneuverability for those larger vehicles that we see that are making the move around the back of the building, and then providing a little more room as they widen out each end on Progress Ave. The existing driveway is fairly narrow at Progress, and we were seeking to make sure that those wheel paths stay within pavement out there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zajac. Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up, and this might be more appropriate for staff. Was any sort of relief or waiver required to basically for a driveway that crosses beyond the setback limit? I'll claim ignorance on that, just a general question, but if someone could address that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, the setback line is for structures. The driveway, they can go into the setback, and it is also at the request of the fire marshal's office for them to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bollinger, I can just add one more piece to that. Typically, the pavement setback is for parking and other pavement is associated with the front yard. In the rear and side yards, I believe, we can pave up to 5 feet around the property line. This is supposed to be a 5-foot green space, which we do have here.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but it looks like you might only be a foot or two from the property line of the abutting property. That was really the crux of the question. Not so much that you crossed over into the setback, but I hope you have a good neighbor, and it's not an issue. That was really the premise behind the question. So thank you.
Understood.
Other questions by the board? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and open the hearing to the public. Is there anybody listening in from the public that wants to speak in opposition or have a question of the plan? Please go ahead and state your name and address for record and unmute. Okay, I'm hearing none. I will go ahead and give the board one more opportunity. Ask any questions of the staff or the applicant during the hearing. Only thing I have is, what is the date of the Public Works review on this one?
It's March 2nd.
Okay, thanks. All right, anything else by the board? Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing, move into the meeting. So reasonably straightforward site plan application. I think Mr. Weber covered all the dumpster stuff pretty well. So we've got obviously some new Public Works review comments, and the applicant has indicated that they were willing to work with Public Works to address those. I think we had a few fire department ones, but again, those are all in the recommended staff stipulations. And I guess if anybody has any comments or wants to discuss in the meeting here from the board. Okay, not hearing any. Anybody want to make a motion? Reminder, there is a waiver request as well.
Weber.
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Just one question first. You mentioned March 2nd. Is that in reference to number 3?
Yes, correct.
3. Okay. And February 10th on 4 is correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Thank you. Just didn't want to make an emotion. Okay, new business project A21-0-0016 site plan. Owner JC Land and Equipment Enterprises LLC, Sweeney Metal Fabrication Inc. at 15 Progress Ave. Finding it does meet NRO 146D. First with one stipulation, NRO 190, 172B, C, and E, establishing building design standard is granted. Finding the waiver will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. 2, as printed. Number 3, changing the dated March 2nd, 2021. 4, 5, and 6 as stipulated.
Okay, so we have that motion to approve as indicated by Mr. Weber with the 6 staff stipulations and the granted waiver. Do we have a second on that?
Oh, I have one more thing to mention.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
In the discussion, the applicant asked for a waiver of 190-170.
I think he had 172, and yeah, Mr. Weber did cover that. Yep,
Okay, thank you.
no problem. So do we have a second on that, Mr. Weber's motion?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion? Okay, can we get a roll vote on that, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclair,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
yes,
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Ballinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 8-0.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. New business site plan, case A21-0015. This is Southern New Hampshire Medical Center owner. This is an application and an acceptance of proposed amendment to NR 1423 to show the construction of a 30 parking spaces and associated site improvements. This property is located at 2 John Street and 21 East Hollis.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
just before we get started, I'm going to recuse myself from this particular case.
Okay, no problem. So I would ask from the board, has anybody had a chance to take a look at the application? Want to make a motion as to whether or not the application is complete and ready to take jurisdiction?
Weber?
Yep, go ahead.
I move we take jurisdiction of project 821-0015 site plan.
Okay, so we have a motion to take jurisdiction. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? Okay, can we get a roll vote on the jurisdiction, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclair,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
yes,
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Ballinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Here you're like, oh, might be frozen up.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, that motion passes.
Passes, so that's okay. All right, so we've taken jurisdiction. Do we have someone from the applicant that just wants to present the case here?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Stephen Auger. I'm a project manager with Hayner Swanson, and our office is located at 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. Joining me in the audience tonight is Mr. Scott Cody from Southern New Hampshire Medical Center. We've come before you seeking site plan approval for a project located at 2 John Street and 21 East Hollis Street. And that project is a site plan for construction of a 30 space parking lot. I'd like to share my screen now and continue with the facts of the case.
Sure.
Okay, so the first sheet here is our master site plan. As I said, the project is proposed on 2 lots, lot 7 and 62, map 30. So lot 7 is this little small lot right here that's currently an abandoned residential home that Southern New Hampshire Med Center has purchased in the past year or so. Lot 62 is a much larger tract. It's got an address of 21 East Hollis, which is this building right here, and all this accompanying parking over here. And there's a small portion of it that extends down here and fronts on John Street. That area, let me actually go to the existing conditions plan to kind of show you a close-up of the portion of the site we're working on. So this here, as I mentioned, is 2 John Street, the existing home. This is the smaller area of 21 East Hollis, and that is currently enclosed by fence, kind of landscape materials storage area that the hospital's plant service department uses. This is actually a site plan that we got approved by the board back in March of 2016. As I mentioned, we're looking to get an approval for a 30 space parking lot. Both of the lots measure a combined 2.68 acres in size. Lot 7, as you can see, is significantly smaller. It's only 0.14 acres. Well, lot 62 is 2.54 acres. Both properties are located in the downtown 1 mixed use, downtown 1 zone with mixed use overlay. The lots are abutted by commercial lots on the north and east, and I'll go back to the master plan so you can see that here. So commercial lots on the north and east. So there's a couple of Southern New Hampshire Medical Center owned lots and some residential lots to the south here. And over on the west, a couple of Southern New Hampshire Medical Center parking lots. Actually, this area right here where I'm running my cursor, it serves as parking for this building, although it is a separate parking lot. The main access point for 21 East Hollis Street is right here where I have my cursor. So it works out well that this area is the parking for it. And these are the ADA accessible spaces, which provide easy access to get into the main building there. We are proposing to, well, actually, before I continue, let me go to the close-up site plan, sheet 3 here. You can see a better picture of what we're doing. We're proposing to demolish the building on at 2 John Street and combine that area with the landscape area here, and we're going to convert that into a 30 space paved parking lot, which will have frontage along John Street here. The current driveway onto John Street for the residential home right here, that'll be eliminated, and we'll fix the sidewalk along that area to match the existing out there, and add some curbing to make it similar to what's going on in the street there. They're currently on the landscape area here. As I mentioned previously, there's a white PVC fence that encloses it here. That's going to remain on this side here and that side here. We're going to take the part that runs up this line here and then relocate a portion of that out to the front. So we're attempting to be good neighbors here. We're going to screen our operation from the folks here and the folks across John Street. There's, I believe, a residential building right there. Stormwater, we are proposing, I'm going to run my cursor, that we've got an infiltration leaching trench right along here. So we've got a couple of catch basins where the parking lot's graded to get our stormwater in here. And this is the typical underground leaching trench that we've used for a number of the parking lots that we've designed for Southern New Hampshire Med Center over the years in this area here. There is an overflow design line that comes out of this basin and ties into an existing basin here. and that connects onto the existing drainage system that runs along the 21 East Hollis Street site. We are showing some proposed additional ADA spaces over here. They, as I mentioned, they are on the abutting lot. But if you look at the overall 21 East Hollis lot, almost all the parking for it is on the eastern side of the building here. And there's no ADA accessible entrance over here. It's right here where the main entrance is. So given how far away these spaces are and the distance that our new spaces are going to be here, in order to puff up the number of ADA accessible spaces, we felt it was the wise thing to do to stripe a few more over in this area to match the existing ones, you know, where they'll really be needed by that main entrance. We aren't asking for any waivers with this site, but as I mentioned, we are in the mixed use overlay district. So Mr. Cody was kind enough to fill out the site plan suitability report, which has 7 criteria to it. And speaking with Mr. Sullivan earlier, he did ask me to kind of quickly run through this and sum it up for everyone. Point number 1 is with proposed existing uses, if they're going to mesh with what goes on in the area. The majority of this area is Southern New Hampshire Med Center's campus, which is a mix of large buildings, medical office buildings, and quite a number of parking lots. So we feel that this proposed development fits in very well with what the neighborhood consists of now. Impacts on the natural and architectural and visible aspect of the site. If you've gone out here to take a look at this house, it's in a bit of disarray. It's abandoned right now, so it really needs to come down. And then once we construct the lot and convert it, it'll fit much better and really fill out and fit in with the neighborhood and what goes on there. Analysis of health and safety impacts on customers and residents. The projects like these that the medical center performs, they're driven by community needs and an increased demand for access to healthcare services for all. So over the years, we've developed a number of parking spaces for the hospital to ease the burden of what they need, not only for patients, but for staff as well. The building at 21 East Hollis here is an administrative office building, and there is some staff training that goes on in there. So it's not your typical medical office building where you have various types of doctors and whatnot. But those folks need a place to park too. Analysis of economic and property impact values. As I mentioned, that 2 John is an existing abandoned building. We feel we're going to be raising the surrounding values of the neighborhood by demoing that building and converting that to additional parking spaces, which will be put to good use by the staff and by any patients that need to gain other access spots to the hospital. Analysis of traffic and parking impacts. As I mentioned, we've been doing this type of work for Southern New Hampshire Medical Center for probably 20 years or so. Their most recent data suggests that on average, there are over 100 spaces vacant during their peak periods of service. And these additional 30 spaces here will only add to that surplus, allowing them to service the community and their staff better. Point number 6, an analysis of the adequacy in existing municipal facilities and services. We don't need any municipal facilities or services required to support this lot here. And the last point, how does this site fit in with not only the mixed use overlay district, but also with the master plan? As I mentioned, the whole neighborhood here is mixed use with numerous hospital uses, and there are many residential homes scattered throughout. So we feel it fits in very well in the mixed use district, and that it does. It is consistent with the master plan for future development in this area. There are 3 stipulations of approval. The first one regards engineering comments that we did receive this week. We have reviewed them. I've discussed them with Mr. Cody. We've engaged Mr. Hudson and his team on those. I'm going to let Mr. Sullivan speak to that in a moment. There's going to be a slight modification to the language for condition of approval number 1. But overall, with regards to some improvements that the engineering department is looking for, we're going to work very closely with Mr. Hudson and his team to do our best to ensure that the right-of-way, the improvements in John Street and Dearborn Street are adequate and comply with pedestrian safety. We have no issues with the other 2 conditions of approval. We believe that this project does comply with the land use code and that the site's being developed in a responsible manner. And we respectfully seek your approval at this time. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Just on the lighting side of the lot, it looked like there's just a couple poles going up. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, on which side?
On the lighting, those are just your typical cutoff type fixtures that are on 3 sides.
Yeah. There's a proposed site light pole there.
Mm-hmm.
There's one there, and there is one right there.
Okay, great, thanks. Other questions by the board for the applicant?
Weber.
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
I noticed this time it seems like you're putting a lot more trees in, and that's a great thing around a parking lot because it keeps the heat down. That's in the summertime for shade. My only other, and I appreciate that. The only other one, do you know how many, if any, electric car chargers the hospital incorporates?
That I do not know. Something like that, I would refer that to Mr. Cody.
Okay. The reason I'm saying is, it's not a stipulation. I would never bring it forth, But in doing okay, I don't know if can you hear me okay?
Yep. You're fine.
Okay. I just heard a blank out. The reason I'm saying it is the hospital does have a lot of parking lots, and they have a big parking garage, and there are more and more electric vehicles coming out, and then as part of the National Regional Planning Commission, we're looking at the electric vehicle and stuff like that that's going to impact this area in the future. And I just would think that it might be a good idea for Southern Medical to look into that and to help their customers that, the people that come have the ability to do that. If it could be in the parking garage would probably be the best place for it, not on these individual things. Just a thought for you guys to bring back to the people, your office. The client. Thank you. That's all I have.
This is Scott Cody, Vice President of Facilities and Operations for Southern New Hampshire Medical Center. We do not have any at this time, but it is something that is under discussion right now with the administrative leadership.
Thanks. Other questions of the applicant by the board?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Bollinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Auger, I just want to make sure I'm reading the plan correctly. is it effectively, and I guess I don't necessarily mean this pejoratively, but is it dead end parking? Like if I were to pull in from the west and there were no parking spaces, would I have to back all the way to the west to come out of there? Is there any sort of potential for connection to the little drive aisle to the north? I'm personally, it's a personal bias. Dead end parking is a pain, especially if you can't complete a 3-point turn. You're basically going to pop it in reverse for about 150 feet, it looks like. So I didn't know if in fact I was interpreting the plan correctly.
No, you are interpreting the plan correctly. We do have at the end here, for the majority of the spaces, our drive aisle is 24 feet wide, and that's kind of standard what we like to use. For if in a case where if this whole lot was full, these lots here, we actually have 30 feet in width there. And that was more of a design aspect. We didn't curb the end here, and that was really because of a potential stormwater ponding area. So I mean, is potentially there's more room to turn around here, but at the same time, it's not a very long lot right here. So, I would think when people come in, if within the first couple car lengths here, you can kind of see if the whole lot is full. So I'm not sure in how many instances where you'd have someone come all the way down here, realizes, there isn't a single space, and then have to back all the way out.
No, and I appreciate that. I just food for thought. Would it have been worth losing 1 or 2 spots to the north to make that connection to that existing drive aisle?
I see what you're saying, Mr. Bollinger. But this here, what we're trying to do is, Mr. Cody wanted this area over here. It kind of gives us a snow storage area a little bit. And we're also trying to maintain a one-way right here. So you see that arrow right there is going to remain. If you were standing, there's another one-way arrow right here. If you were standing right here, I believe it's right there, you'll see some do not enter signs. So we really didn't want to create a situation where if, say we, added some curbing here and made a connection point right here, where you have, cars pulling straight through here, trying to access a one-way lane right there. It's just, it's just potential for confusion.
I would agree. I would just counter, if you do have to do the reverse maneuver for the 150 feet, that's perhaps more consternating to a potential patient or visitor. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bollinger. Any further questions of the applicant by the board? Okay. Hearing none, I will go ahead and open up the hearing to anybody in the public who's listening in. Anybody want to ask a question of the plan of the applicant? Please go ahead and unmute, state your name and address for record. Okay, I am not seeing anybody. I'll give the board one last chance to talk to staff or the applicant during the hearing. Mr. Sullivan, did you want to add something to the engineering?
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to make a modification per Mr. Auger's comment to the proposed condition number 1 included within your packet. The recommended condition after working with City Engineer Hudson and the team, including Scott Cody and Steve Auger, is the condition as follows, which is prior to the chair signing the plan, all comments in an email from engineering dated 3/2/2021 will be addressed to the satisfaction of the Division of Public Works, including that the applicant agrees to work with the DPW to evaluate possible alternatives in providing ADA pedestrian crossings at the John Street and Dearborn Street intersection. And again, we're adding in that subsequent language stating, including that the applicant agrees to work with DPW to evaluate possible alternatives in providing ADA pedestrian crossings at the John Street and Dearborn Street intersection. Thank you.
Okay. And that was at John's and what was
John
it?
and Dearborn.
And Dearborn.
Yep. And the reasoning behind this modification is just to emphasize that particular item from the staff comments.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other questions of the applicant or more the staff while we're in the hearing from the board? Okay, hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the hearing. Move into the meeting. Okay, so we've got a parking lot site plan here. Again, pretty straightforward. Anybody have any comments or discussion points they want to talk about during the meeting? Anybody from the board?
Weber,
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
is it all right to just state on number one the date and then just as Matt stated, Matt Sullivan stated?
Yeah, I think that's fine because this is a recorded version anyway. So yeah.
I'll just say.
I mean, I think I can repeat it when I'm repeating the motion anyway. So
You're faster at writing than I am.
okay. Any other comments by the board? Somebody want to make a motion? Mr. Weber, you want
I'll make a motion. Nobody wants to.
to go ahead?
New business project A 21-0015 site plan, Southern New Hampshire Medical Center, 2 John Street and 21 East Hollis Street. Finding that the plan meets site plan meets NRO 190, 146D and 190-23F. Prior to the chair signing the plan on one is dated 3/2/21 and the statement that Matt Sullivan made, and 2 and 3 as written.
Okay, so we have that motion by Mr. Weber to approve the plan with the modifications to stipulation number 1 with the date 3/2/2021. And just a reminder to the board that Mr. Sullivan indicated that the applicant would stress that the applicant work with DPW to address pedestrian ADA crossing at Johns and Dearborn Street. So, do we have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? Okay. Can we get a roll vote on that, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Maggie Parker,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 7-0.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Moving on with our agenda. Next up, new business site plan A21-0007. This is the Residence at Riverfront Landing Limited Partnership owner, Renaissance at Nashua LLC applicant. This is an application and acceptance of proposed site plan amendment to NR 1975 to amend a condition of approval. This property is located in 9 Bancroft Street. So do we have anybody on the board that's had a chance to look at this packet and our application and want to make a motion as to whether it's ready for us to take jurisdiction?
Move to take jurisdiction.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Hurst to take jurisdiction. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Barley. Any further discussion? Okay, let's get a roll vote on the jurisdiction, please.
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Varley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
Passes 8-0.
Okay, great. And then I think we'll go ahead and hear from the applicant on this particular case, understanding there is some relationship to the next one, but I think we can take them just in series here. So I'll kind of go through this one first. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. Andy Perlman of Prunier and Perlman for your applicant Renaissance at Nashua. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, fine. Yep.
Okay, great. Mr. Chairman, members, we are just seeking to amend a condition of the site plan approval that this board approved back in 2016 for phase 1 of this Renaissance Bridge Street project. Ryan Porter is with us tonight, and Ryan will give a full history of phase 1 and phase 2 and how we got here. So I'm going to skip over that piece, but we were before the board in 2016 for phase 1 of this project that ultimately was built out to 159 apartments that we see today. As we were going through the design process, working with staff, we found that the Bridge and D Street intersection needed a traffic signal. It was our main entrance into phase 1 of the project. And so we knew that we needed a traffic signal. At the same time, back in 2016, we also knew that the city and DOT, New Hampshire DOT, was looking at the big X intersection coming off of the Taylor Falls Bridge, East Hall Street, Bridge Street, and the bridge, we call it the big X intersection. So we knew we needed a traffic signal at D Street. We knew we had a few whether the DOT work for the intersection would affect D Street. So again, working with staff, we all agreed that if we give the issue a couple of years, we should be able to determine whether or not the temporary traffic signal that we installed at D Street would need to be turned into a permanent traffic signal. So we agreed to escrow enough money to make that conversion. And we all agreed to wait 3 years' time from the certificate of occupancy for one of the buildings with phase 1. And we all thought that would be plenty of time to determine whether or not we'd have to do any further improvements to the D Street traffic signal. Well, fast forward to 2021, and here we are today, and the deadline, according to the condition of approval to convert the traffic signal, is this August. And even though we thought we had plenty of time, we still don't know whether the design of the X intersection from New Hampshire DOT will impact D Street. We worked with Tim Cummings and Matt Sullivan and Linda McGee to take a look at this issue. We understand that work is anticipated to start in 2022, possibly into 2023, but we don't know whether the D Street intersection will come into play with the design for the new intersection that's being worked on now. So as a result, we are asking the board to further push out that condition. We put the issue to staff, and we came up with a proposal to extend that condition out another 4 years. We expect that we will know relatively soon because of the anticipated construction schedule, but we believe that's going to be sufficient time to determine whether the D Street traffic signal will have to convert from a temporary signal that's there today to a permanent signal or not. It may not, depending on how the layout works and the improvement coming off the Taylor Falls Bridge, how the new improvements all work together. So that's all we're really trying to do with this request tonight, is just to extend that condition out an additional period of time. We approached planning staff some months ago, and I know that Matt and Linda and the whole team kicked this around, and they agreed that this made sense, and they suggested a 4-year extension to the condition. And that's all we're trying to do with this request, Mr. Chairman. And again, you'll hear a lot more about this big project when Ryan Porter takes up the next application. And that's all I had. I can answer questions.
Okay. Anybody from the board have any specific questions regarding this request?
Weber.
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
The question actually I'd like to address to Dan Hudson. The $150,000 that is stipulated now, how much of that will actually pay for this? If it does have to, would that really, or would it, would the city need more than that $150 to complete that in 4 years? Or has that been addressed?
It's a fair question. I don't have the answer to. You know, it's in the ballpark without having done a detailed estimate, which I assume was done before and was the basis for this. You know, I haven't looked at all the details of that design, how many mast arms and whatnot would be required. But I think what you're getting at is, should we increase the cost? I mean, at this point, I'm not sure that you know, the intersection will be needed at that time. So, you know, I don't, you know, we're holding a decent amount of money. It's probably suitable. And, you know, the amount we're holding is probably suitable at this point, I guess, would be my feeling.
Okay, my only question is now to the applicant, because they want to move it farther back. Are they amenable to work with the engineering department on the cost factor if it is reached? Would they be amenable to an increase and pay for that increase in cost? Not outstanding amount of money, not putting forth a whole bunch of money, but understanding that the cost of doing this, and they're wanting to ship it out longer, that there may be an increase. And I'd just like to hear what their thoughts on that.
Do you want me to comment on that, Andy? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, members of the board, Mr. Chairman, Ryan Porter, one of the partners over at Renaissance. I feel like I know some of you, but it's been a long time that we've been working on this project. So Mr. Weber, I guess when we did the original condition, we did add escalation to the cost, which brought us to the August of this year period. You know, from my experience, and you know, Bob Simons from SMC, who's our partner, who's building the project, could speak to this probably as well, who's on the call. But I don't believe there's going to be a material escalation between now, or the August date that we escalated to, and the date that we're asking to push it to. So I don't think it should be an issue. I'm not saying we wouldn't be amenable to the discussion, but I just want to let the board know from an economic perspective, this has been a partnership with the city, this whole project. So basically, on the closing of this deal, the city is basically getting half the proceeds from SMC for the deal, which is about $775,000. And obviously, we're bringing the site that has been city-owned, since Mansville closed for the better part of 50 years, back on the tax rolls, to the extent that it'll be paying, by the time we get the 4 years, probably $300,000+ a year in new real estate taxes. So I'm hoping that the board would be amenable to the fact that I don't think that the delta between the amount we escrowed that had already been escalated and the amount that will eventually be needed to build the signal will be large. And if so, there's obviously a lot of economics that are coming to the city over the next, when we close, and over the next, you know, several years for this. So happy to have the conversation. But I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be fairly moot, because as Dan mentioned, we also believe there's a fairly low probability that this signal will actually remain at the end of the day. So hopefully that answers your question, but you know, if we want to push the issue to more meetings and discussions, we're happy to do so.
Thank you. No, you answered my question completely. And I'm not looking to have an increase in, as a stipulation at all. It's just, you already have stated that you're amenable to no problem if that happens. So I also wanted to state, I was there at the beginning of this Renaissance, and I looked at the beauty, and I've been around in those buildings because of, we had other things coming forth to the board, and you guys have really done a great job down there, and it really does beautify that part of Nashua, and I just want to thank you for it.
No, thank you, Mr. Weber. I mean, honestly, I've been working in this city since 2009, so I feel like Nashua, I live in Brooklyn, but Nashua is kind of a second home to me. It's been a long haul, and we're making great progress. So I'm happy to continue the discussion. I'm excited to present the next, details.
Other questions for the applicant on this particular piece, Ms. Harper?
Just out of curiosity, besides the fact that the equipment there now is temporary and we're discussing long-term equipment, what is the difference in the equipment that's there versus the permanent lights and what have you? Is it pretty much the same thing, just temporary versus permanent?
I mean, Dan is probably better at answering this, frankly, than I am, or one of our engineers. I mean, I know, the mast arms and the structure that holds the
well, right,
are in temporary nature, are not as solid, I would say,
right,
as they would be for the permanent signal. I don't know, Dan, if you or Brian from our engineering team was on, could comment further on that.
Yeah. Just the capabilities as far as crosswalks and timing of the lights and all of that. Is it, the same thing, or will it have more capabilities?
Go ahead, Dan.
Chair?
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, the permanent signal, if installed, certainly would have additional capabilities. I don't believe we have pedestrian crossings as a feature in the temporary signal. The temporary signal is, I think, poles and span wire based. The permanent one would be mast arms on permanent foundations, that sort of thing. So it is a change. It would be an improvement. There may be some salvageable parts, controllers and that sort of thing. But for the most part, it would be fairly much new equipment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. Dan, would it have because of its, what it controls, Canal Street, would it be video, also a camera there, as is like Daniel Webster Highway, there's many cameras? Would it have that because of its, the problems that now, may exist? Well, they do exist from that.
Mr. Chair, if I might. Yeah, and that is a newer technology that we're moving to with all of our, we're upgrading signals. Any new installations, we would look for a similar technology. The video cameras, as I've stated before, have good benefit. Avoids having loops in the road that can get cut as we do paving and other things, and then the signal doesn't function properly. And then they have some places we have the added benefit of being able to do traffic counts and those sort of things to be more responsive to the conditions. So yeah, certainly we would be looking for those types of features in a new installation.
Okay. Other questions by the board? Mr. Peterson?
Yes. There's another application tonight related to Renaissance project, which would dramatically change the number of people and amount of traffic in that area. So I think whatever information we gather regarding this particular light, all the data would change, and we'd have to reevaluate after the next project is completed.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I guess I'm maybe a little bit confused as to why we're thinking about granting, extending the date on the condition, because I guess, is it the supposition of the applicant that there's still going to be a signal, but maybe if the state project comes along, they pay for it? Or is the supposition that the state is going to say no signal is required? I'm just trying to understand that distinction. That's question number one. Question number two is, if the state intends to break ground, shovels in the ground in 2022, I'm kind of confused as to why there's not a more definitive answer at this point. There's an extensive preliminary engineering process, right-of-way process, and before shovels hit the ground, there's public hearings. I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly what 1 year does. And I would think that the state would be further along in the process. And I'll take a response to those two questions from anybody who feels they can answer them. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, let me give that a try, or maybe I would defer to Mr. Hudson in the first instance.
Yeah, Dan, you want to talk about what's going on with the intersection?
Yeah, Attorney Perlman, you can go ahead, because I know you reached out to Director Cummings on this issue.
Mr. Bollinger, to answer your first question, the honest answer is we don't know what the design is going to be with respect to what DOT is planning. We have been in touch with McFarland Johnson, who is currently the lead engineer on this. And I was advised that this piece of that design has not come into play yet with respect to D Street. And then in addition, I'm trying to find my notes. I've been in touch with Tim Cummings, who's been really tracking this for the city. And what Tim said to me, if I can find it, I'll read it to you. And of course I can't find it. Oh, here it is, I'm sorry. What he said to me was he expects that construction will not start until late 2022, more likely 2023. And so because we don't know what the design is, and because the 2022, more likely 2023, we believe the design is still being worked out, we just saw it as a waste of time and money to install a permanent signal now if DOT says, well, it's not needed based upon our new design, or if DOT does it on as their project. So we're just asking for time to see how that plays out. The money is there if we need it down the road, and that's all we're looking to do.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to add, if that's okay. Yeah, just to be very clear, Mr. Bollinger, we are not trying to insinuate that DOT will pay for this. We're just saying that we are not in control of the design process. Oddly enough, McFarland Johnson, who is doing the design with the city with the DOT, is our engineer on this project, right? So we're as intimate with it as we can be, I guess, but there's no answer as to whether the final design that DOT approves will necessitate or not necessitate the D Street signalization. So until we know that, we just feel it's, as Andy said, it would be a waste to build the intersection. We're not trying to take the money back. We're just trying to wait till we have an answer, basically. And the recommendation of the 4 years came out of the uncertainty of the timing of figuring that out, and was, something that was discussed, as Attorney Pullman said, with planning and economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up. Thank you, Attorney Perlman and Mr. Porter. I appreciate that explanation. The only other suggestion I may have, with all due respect to your consultant, or you may want to have a contact at New Hampshire DOT that you're dealing with directly. The state is going to drive the process, and that's not a slam at your engineer. But if there are hiccups with regard to any stage of the PE or right-of-way process or funding or public hearing, the state is going to drive this McFarland Johnson, as much as they want to be proactive for you, they kind of have to be reactive to the terms that the state dictates. So in terms of just overall grand scope and scheduling, you may want to get that information perhaps closer to the source. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to let Mr. Bollinger know, thank you for that recommendation. We will definitely reach out. I've dealt with a lot of DOTs and I understand where you're coming from 100%. I think we will definitely do that outreach. You know, just to make sure everybody understands historically, that intersection, and I'm not saying there weren't other reasons, but a lot of the material reason that that intersection is being designed in the first place was from this project on the outset. So in 2009, when we started this effort and tried to put our master plan in cohesion with the East Hollis Street master plan, it was determined at that point that an intersection improvement needed to be made. And there was many iterations of roundabouts and all sorts of things that happened. So my intimacy with this process only adds to your suggestion, in that I should reach out on my own probably and make sure that I know where things are going. So thank you.
Ms. Harper?
Yes, I'm just curious. Do you know where the closest signalized crosswalk is from this particular point?
Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm just curious because in thinking about adding additional housing and looking at parking plans versus units, I guess I feel a little concerned about the number of pedestrians that could be coming to and from the project. And, you know, just the concern for their safety.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
Ms. Harper, it's a great concern. We have the same concern, especially considering long-term that, you know, this project was designed in the hopes that there may be rail service in the neighborhood in the future. I was part of, you know, many state efforts 10 years ago to push that, and then eventually a potential siting in that area, obviously on the other side of the neighborhood, was put in place under the former administration. We understand what you're saying. The short answer is because of where the railroad tracks is and how close that is to the new designed intersection and the need for a turning lane, which you'll see in the design for our next phase, to enter and exit the project safely, as well as the fire and life safety needs. There really isn't enough space to locate a crosswalk. I mean, our whole point of this development is to create a pedestrian-friendly area. So it's very near and dear to my heart, frankly. Unfortunately, the designs don't allow us to add one from what we've worked on so far with engineering. It was brought up by traffic as well. But what we do know, or what we have been told, is that the current designs for the Taylor's Falls Bridge larger intersection project is supposed to include pedestrian access and pedestrian safety points to cross from one side of the neighborhood to the other, from East Hollis over, from Canal over to East Hollis, Bridge Street over to East Hollis, I should say. So I think that, you know, unfortunately, as Mr. Bollinger pointed out, we're kind of at the whim of DOT because they're driving a lot of the timing of all these improvements, and each one impacts the other, right? But we looked, and traffic asked us, and we looked with traffic at, could we source a pedestrian crossing between where the new intersection is going to be and the railroad tracks, but we can't find a spot that works, frankly.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions by the board on this particular piece of it? Okay. All right, thanks. At this point, I'd ask, I'll open to the audience. Is anybody, I don't think there are very many people, but in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to this application or have a question, go ahead and unmute and state your name and address for record. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. Last shot for the board during the hearing with the applicant or staff. Linda? Yep.
I was looking at my staff report and it looks like every other page didn't get copied. I don't know if you guys have the same problem or if it's just me.
In the hard copy, yes, but not in the emailed copy.
Okay, because there is just one stipulation and
Yeah, I think most of us, if you have the electronic version of the packet, the pages are in the electronic version.
okay. If not, I do have the stipulation. Read it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can read it if somebody wants to. I have it on screen here. Okay, hearing nothing else from the board in the hearing here, I'll go ahead and close the hearing, move to the meeting. So we have a couple of things going on here with this development. I obviously was on the board during this last approval and familiar with the topic we're talking about here. Personally, I think, understanding what's going on at the intersection there and all the different options that have been presented, I would tend to agree anything we try to put in right now is likely going to be having to be changed at a later time or not used. So I'm not sure we want to attack any kind of permanent solution right now. And I know even in the capital planning subcommittee, the intersection was in there as a high priority project, the one that you folks looked at a couple of weeks ago. And as far as the money is concerned, on my end, Mr. Weber, I think we're making them hold on to this 150 grand for like approaching 5 to 7 years here now. It's kind of a sunk cost on their end anyway, so they're probably losing money as we speak. So I'm not sure I'd want to sign them up for more. And I think if we do want to sign them up for more, we probably need to give an exact number, because I don't think we can leave anything open like that in a stipulation. Just my 2 cents. So, but happy to hear comments from anybody.
Weber, no, I'm not looking for anything. They answered my question as far as they're going to work with planning. So I don't want to do anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it would be a bad idea.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments or discussion items? Mr. Bollinger? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a general question. Is there a legally defined time period where the funds can be held in escrow? It might not be comparing apples to apples, but I know in some jurisdictions, if you hold impact fee money for too long and don't spend it, it needs to be returned. I didn't know if the same was applicable with regard to escrow funds. And I would hope that if the applicant is the one hoping for the extension, that they wouldn't mind having the escrow continue to be held, but I don't know what the statutory requirements are in that instance. And I'm not necessarily saying that we have to reopen the public hearing, but I guess I would like clarification on that from either staff or the applicant. And I know we're in closed session now.
Yeah,
so.
I can't get the applicant, but maybe Matt can talk.
I believe what Attorney Perlman is going to say is that the funds are being held in escrow outside of the city, correct? Is that, I don't know if Attorney Perlman can nod his head. Yes. And I'm not aware of any specific restrictions on our escrow accounts, although I may not be aware of them. But Mr. Bollinger, to your point, there is a 6-year limitation on the impact fee expenditures, which I believe is what you're referring to. But I'm not aware of any specific restriction in this case that would create an issue.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the discussion here? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on this particular one? I don't know if everybody, do some of you have the electronic version, or do you need me to read it? Or?
Yeah, Scott, I have the electronic version, so I'm happy to.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
So I will make a motion to approve new business project A21-0007, site plan at 9 Bancroft Street. And that is with the finding that the amendment to the site plan as proposed meets the requirements of site plan NRO on section 190-146D. And the amendment proposed by the applicant as approved would be subject to the one stipulation as written in the staff report.
Okay. And a reminder to the board, that's the $150,000 be maintained for another 4 years from the date of the approval. So, do we have a second on Mr. Barley's motion?
I'll second it.
Second.
By Mr. Hirsch.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Okay, can we get a roll vote on that, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Dan Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Abstain.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 7-0 with 1 abstention.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move on to new business site plan. This is case number 820-0157, City of Nashua owner, Renaissance at Nashua LLC applicant. Application and acceptance of proposed site plan to construct 3 buildings consisting of 170 residential units, cafe, fitness center, and associated site improvements. This property is located at 40 Bridge Street and 10 Sanders Street. Has anybody from the board had a chance to take a look at this application and want to make a motion as to whether it's ready for us to take jurisdiction?
I'll make that motion.
I actually have a motion by Mr. Barley to take jurisdiction. Do we have a second?
Weber, second.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? Okay, can we get a roll vote, please, on the jurisdiction?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Dan Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 8-0.
Okay, thanks. From the applicant, want to start the presentation?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, this is Ryan Porter, partner and principal at Renaissance Downtowns at Nashua. Our address is 1044 New York Avenue, Huntington Station, New York, 11746. I will share my screen, if that's okay. And I will play the presentation. Okay. Oh my God. All right. So thank you, everyone, for being with us this evening. I will try to be as succinct as possible, but obviously this is a bit more complicated than some of the earlier applications. So this is phase 2 of our Bridge Street revitalization. And just to give a quick background, we've been working in partnership with the City of Nashua since 2009, at which time we responded to a request for proposals to partner with the city to revitalize 2 primary development pads on the eastern border of the city of Nashua near the Taylor's Falls Bridge. We formed that partnership, and our goal together was to bring forth a mixed-use walkable development in that neighborhood. We spent several years working on concept plans, discussing things with neighbors. We had an effort that was a crowdsourcing, community-based effort called Visualize Nashua. We had a local office in your city for years, all of which was a great experience and allowed us to progress this project to what it is today. There are still some aspects of the master plan that we'd like to see move forward after this phase. But for now, we're looking just to present to you phase 2 of the revitalization effort. For those who are not familiar, but I'm sure most folks know what we're talking about right now, this is a large former Johns Manville site, again, at the confluence of the Nashua and Merrimack rivers. The blue outline is the total site of 26 acres of land, a portion of which was, again, 2 large development sites that the city owns and took, years ago, partially through an eminent domain process and some other procedures, And the center site, which bisects the two city-owned parcels, is owned by the Bennett family and is a mixed commercial operation that has been operating there for quite some time. The red bordered is the sites that we're talking about for development of the second phase of the master plan. This was the original approved master plan from back in the 2011, I think 10-11 timeframe. We had worked very closely with the city, and our direct partner at the city kind of agency level is the Business and Industrial Development Authority. So the BIDA, Chairman Tully, Economic Development have been basically our day-to-day counterparts until we obviously get to the level of site civil drawings, at which time planning and other departments, engineering and traffic, would get involved in the project. They have had input obviously along the way into the concepts, but most of the conceptual efforts were done between us and the BIDA. And this original master plan called for about 750, just short of 750 residential units, and about 100,000 square feet of commercial space, a lot of which was repurposing and use of the center Bennett parcel that exists today. The master plan changed obviously over the last 13 years multiple times, but kind of to give you from the 2010 to 2013 timeframe, this was the kind of the latest version of it, and the phase one that was ultimately built here was close to actually the original proposed density, other than the fact that we never built this building where my cursor is circling here. And a lot of that was due to complications with the stormwater management and all the issues that we had to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers, because this site is actually protected by an Army Corps of Engineers levee that was built a long time ago. It's actually an asbestos berm that was built quite some time ago. But originally, these parcel was going to house around 230 units. If we had built all three buildings, it would have been in the 220 or so unit range, and ended up only developing two buildings and the small riverfront building, which got us to about 159 units. And then again, this west parcel, which is the other city-owned parcel, was projected to be about 188 units, and our application tonight is for 177 units. So very consistent still, aside from the stormwater basin issue that we couldn't resolve with the densities that were projected back when we did the original master plan work. So this kind of zooms in just to kind of give you again, just to repeat that the first phase was completed in August of 2018. It was 152 units. There were 7 units added after the fact, so it's currently a total of 159 units. The average annual occupancy of this project has been 98%. So we've always known that since we got into town and started working with the city, that there was a need for this type of development, and that this site would obviously be a very attractive site to be able to bring forth this type of multifamily development, and that has proven out thus far. But the parcels that are in question for this phase are parcel number 37, parcel number 32, and the existing Sanders Street right-of-way on the left-hand side of my screen right here. The proposal that we're bringing forth to the board tonight is a mix of 3 5-story buildings, very similar to the buildings that were built in phase 1, in that they are 4 stories of residential over 1 parking podium. They would have building amenities that are similar, including clubhouse, fitness center / yoga, cyber cafes. The parking will be a combination, as with phase 1, of surface parking and podium parking. What I really like about phase 2 is that because of the shape of the parcel and because of how we were able to design the parcel, it actually creates and keeps Sanders Street as a much more walkable pedestrian right of way. in that the buildings are set at the street frontage, and we were able to work the parking behind and under the buildings so that you get that feel of walking down an active street. The commercial will be about a 500 square foot commercial space that will sit at the corner of Sanders Street and Bridge Street, where obviously you have visibility. We see it as a very key convenience-based commercial space for the residents in the neighborhood. Do not have a tenant as of today. It's a little early for that, but we're confident that with all the residents that will be living in this phase, along with the neighboring commercial uses of the Bennett facilities and phase one, that we will be able to attract a convenience-based retailer to come into that space. In addition to that, eventually we'll be building as part of this project. It will not have service right away, but we will be building a new bus stop for transit. So it'll be great because the bus stop will be stopping, just adjacent to commercial space in a pedestrian plaza. So it'll really create that feel that we're looking to achieve. The total acreage of the site is about 3.5 acres. And the total development square footage that we're looking to bring forth is about 183,000 square feet. Again, it's 177 units with a mix of 27 studios, 58 one bedrooms, 92 two bedrooms. And from a parking perspective, we are providing the requisite parking plus one. So it's not 267 spaces for the demand of 266. These are the actual engineered plans, or a summary of some of the engineered plans. We are requesting some waivers that are very consistent with the waivers that we requested for phase one. This is in the mixed use overlay district. So with that, I'm going to stop my rambling, and I'm going to let our project engineer, Brian from McFarland Johnson, take over and just talk about some of kind of the larger scale stuff of infrastructure, utilities, traffic, and some of the waivers that we're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So my name is Brian Patinskis. I'm with McFarland Johnson. Like Ryan said, I'm the project engineer on this project for him. So first off, I'll talk about drainage. So for this job, we are using paved aisles, which will convey stormwater to the proposed parking stalls, which is where we're going to be using porous pavement. So this will also be the case for Sanders Street. We'll be paving Sanders Street and using porous pavement in the parallel parking stalls that you can see on there. And once it gets to the porous pavement, the water is going to infiltrate into the ground and then be treated. So we're providing full treatment for all the stormwater on this site. And the roofs will be, so the roofs are going to have, will drain to the underground stormwater chambers, and those will also infiltrate into the ground as well. So this is the same type of treatment and stormwater we used on phase one. So it mimics the same thing. And there's been no complaints or no issues with that phase. For utilities, we're going to have underground electric on site. We're going to be pulling power from a pole about halfway up Sanders Street. We're still working on Eversource to finalize pole relocations because there's 2 or 3 on Bridge Street. You probably can't see it on here, but there's a few at the intersection that need to be relocated. So we're just working through the final locations of those. For the gas main, we are connecting to the 12-inch line under Bridge Street. We worked with Liberty on this one, and they've approved this plan. So we're going to connect into that and then extend the line all the way up Sanders Street for possible future expansion if that ever comes down on the line. And then obviously the buildings will tie into that line. And water, we're going to be tying into the 12-inch main under Sanders Street and also the 12-inch main under Bridge Street to create a loop through the site. And this was reviewed by Penn and Chuck, and they're okay with what we're doing. And next is traffic. So we provided a traffic plan to Public Works, which they have approved at this point. So as part of their review, though, they did request that we had dedicated turning lanes on Sanders Street, which you can see. So there's a left out and a right out. That was just done to alleviate backup on Sanders Street, because obviously there's going to be trouble turning out of there during rush hour. And the other request from Public Works was we add a left turn lane on Bridge Street itself. This was done to avoid any backups caused by cars trying to turn left into the site. So Bridge Street will always be free flowing past the site. So there shouldn't be any issues there. And then for lighting design on the site, we are using the same fixtures that were used on phase one. So it should look exactly the same as the fixtures over there. And
We also provided a photometric plan on the plan set, which I think everyone has access to. They can see that. So on that plan, they actually have the fixtures if you wanted to look at them. And then same kind of thing for landscaping, where we had a landscape architect produce a plan for us, and they took the plan from phase 1 and mimicked that one to stay consistent. So this phase is going to be pretty much the same looking for in terms of plantings. That's pretty much it for engineering. I guess, Ryan, do you want me to go over the waivers at this point?
Please, if you don't mind.
Okay, so there's several of them, so just be patient. So the first one is for 190-193A. So this is for parking space dimensions. So we're proposing to do 18-foot long parking spaces as opposed to the 20-foot that's in the code. And this was done in order to maximize the amount of parking spaces on the site. And as you can see, we're only +1 as it is. So we kind of had to do this. And this also mimics what was done on phase 1. We had the same waiver was approved on that one. The next waiver is 190-208B, which is for vertical granite curbing that we're going to be using throughout the site. So we want to use this to avoid cars driving over the curb and just provide a cleaner look in the end. It'll just look better. And this was also done on phase 1 as well. And then the next waiver is 190-208C. So this one is for the typical section of Sanders Street not being wide enough. So we are providing 24 feet as opposed to the 28 feet that's required by city. So this was done due to lack of right-of-way on Sanders Street. As you can see, we're pretty much right up against the line on the sidewalk down near the intersection. There's no way we could have made that wider. And this will fit in with the other development as well. The next waiver is 190-279S, which this is for survey not showing the properties across the street. So we're only showing the front lines of the buildings and driveways as opposed to the entire buildings. And we feel this is fine since these properties aren't really being affected by this job anyways. So we don't see this as being an issue. And the next waiver is 190-279EE. And this is survey, because the survey doesn't show all the up-to-date information. So the survey that we used on this, we obtained it back in, I think, 2011 when phase 1 was being done. So obviously some stuff has changed out here, but it shouldn't really be an issue for us since all the adjacent properties are still the same. It's really just the phase 1 that's much different now. And then the final waiver is 190-279CC. So instead of providing the city with a stormwater report, we are providing an AOT permit for this. We applied for an AOT permit to the state, which was also submitted to the city. So they've had a chance to review and look at that. So we feel that's not going to be an issue. And that is all of them.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. This is just building C zoomed in. The first was building A zoomed in, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about open spaces because I think that's been a long piece of our discussions over the years with the BIDA is what open spaces we could provide. It's, obviously it's a tight site as well. I mean, our need for some waivers, shows that. And the site design shows that. But again, we were excited that we were able to bring forth some cool open space designs as part of the project. So we worked with the VIDA to come to a conclusion of several open space programming throughout the development. One I spoke briefly of already, which is the pedestrian plaza at A. And that'll, obviously contain seating and have kind of the commercial space. So it'll be a nice gathering space for both residents and folks who live in the adjacent neighborhood. Number two is as I had mentioned, because of the ability to bring the buildings up to the front of the street, we are creating a more walkable street that's not fronted by cars or by parking or surface parking. So it really creates an active walk when you're walking down the street. We do have parallel parking, which will be good for slowing traffic as well and creating that walkable street. C, which will occur from in intervals throughout the length of Sanders Street right-of-way. We're looking to install an art walk. We believe art walks are a great way to bring the arts community and the neighborhood and other visitors to Sanders Street, as well as obviously an amenity for the residents and the commercial users next door, to have kind of that art exhibition as you walk down Sanders Street. We're going to be working with the Sculpture Symposium folks, who Andy was nice enough to work with, one actually, Mr. Hirsch, and some of the board, some other folks in the city who know some of these folks. And once we have the site plan approved, and once we start picking out, the final details of the buildings, and we start working through the building permit process, that's when we really want to get hot and heavy on starting to select the sculptures that we'd like to bring forth. In addition, there was discussion with the folks from Transit about bringing a sculpture not just along Sanders Street, but also one where the bus stop will be. So it'll be a nice feature for future bus riders, even though that service is not going to be in place for quite some time. We'll be prepared for it when it does. The last public open space, these were all public open space that we are going to be programming on the site, is a dog park. So we are excited to bring forth, the site is obviously, as I said, an odd shape insofar as the property to this, going up, this is east. The property to the east is controlled by the Bonnettes. The property to the west, adjacent to the river, is actually controlled by the railroad. So we only have this small kind of sliver here that approaches the levee and the river as part of this site. And but what we were able to do with that is exciting insofar as we're going to turn it into an active dog park. So it's going to be trees and fenced, and we'll have furniture, and it'll be an opportunity for folks who used to use this area to walk their dog can now be able to walk their dog as well. But they can walk down Sanders, an active street. They can stop at the cafe on the way, and then they can hit the sculptures and ultimately end up at the dog park at the end of their walk, close to the riverfront. Then also the buildings will have some private open spaces. Obviously, with the pandemic, private open space has become even more of a premium in a lot of these instances. Not to say that we wouldn't have done it anyways, but it was fortuitous that we were looking towards this path. There are some similar private open space in phase one, and a lot of SMC's projects have similar designs, but we're looking to do a garden space behind building A, and a bocce court for some less passive and more active use from the residents behind building C, I think that is, sorry. And with that, I will walk you through a little bit more detail. These are the designs for the plaza. This is kind of the feel we're looking for when we talk about plantings and seating, stamped concrete surfaces, trees and benches. From a walkable streets perspective, again, we provide kind of that street width and the parallel parking and a sidewalk width that we feel will lend itself to a very pedestrian and friendly environment. We obviously have street lighting, as Brian talked about, and benches and landscaping and tree pits, as well as sculptures. The art walk, we have, as I said, yet to pick out the sculptures yet, but we'll be working with hopefully the local arts community to do so, and bring forth some of kind of the culture and the historic nature and the future of the city of Nashua. And last but not least is the dog park, which we discussed. I kind of got ahead of myself giving all these descriptions before I actually showed you the slides, but I got excited about it. And obviously we'll have the dog park for folks to use. The garden, we've done some preliminary designs for the garden, and that'll have planter boxes, for neighborhood gardening. It'll probably have a fire pit, and some seating areas for the residents. And finally, the bocce courts are fairly self-explanatory as a more active use, for folks. And there'll be a barbecue area, as there was in phase one and in many of the projects that SMC works on. Finally, I just want to kind of walk you through some of the renderings. This is a rendering, again, very similar in design to phase one to keep kind of that consistency from a master plan perspective, with you know, the stone on the lower floors and the plank on the upper floors, some of the Juliet balconies kind of look. And you know, we're looking right now, we're looking kind of at the plaza as you enter on Sanders Street. Excuse me. This is a view as you get in between buildings 2 and 3, or B and C, as you're working your way up Sanders Street towards the river. And this is a view looking back towards those buildings with your back to the river on Sanders. So with that, I will scooch back to the site plan and turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Couple quick questions. The parking along Sanders, that's overnight parking? Is it proposed to be overnight parking? Yeah.
I actually don't remember the answer to that, Mr. Chairman. We had a lot of back and forth with the city, I recall, maybe you recall, for phase one as to how we were going to treat the public right of way.
Yeah.
We still have to go through the right of way process with the city, you know, because basically we don't want to take the right of way private, because if we do, then there's some issues with ownership of that land. So it'll remain a city-owned parcel. So I don't recall. Bob, do you recall how we settled on phase one, which we would do the same for phase two?
Bob, you got to unmute and go ahead and state your name and address for record too.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. My name is Bob Simons from SMC Management. Our office is at 100 Galen Street in Watertown, Mass, or 9 Bancroft Street, depending on which office. But yeah, on Bancroft Street, those parking spaces are part of the count for the whole project. So they're the same characteristic as the parking in the parking lots.
Okay.
But yes, they would be overnight, Mr. Chairman.
But that's a public street, right? Sanders?
Mm-hmm. As is Bancroft, correct.
Right. So maybe this is a question for Matt. How do we get away with overnight parking on a public street?
I'm not sure, Ryan, was there a lease contemplated, of leasing of these spaces contemplated with them proposed in the public way? Because I think, Mr. Chair, that would be the mechanism for it, but I'm not aware that that was discussed.
It'd have to be something that, yeah, otherwise you'd be under the regular ordinance of the city, which doesn't allow it.
Right.
We've done, Mr. Chairman, a lot of easements for phase one, so it might be an easement situation. I don't recall us doing a lease for phase one, but I know we did, and we will have to do several easements with the city. You know, as an example, there's going to have to be an easement for the bus stop, right? Because it's going to encroach upon the property that once it's transferred to the development. So my guess is that we're going down an easement path. Andy, I don't know if you have any other further thoughts on that or comments on that.
Well, it sounds like Matt's got something here.
Well, Ryan, I was just I was just going to add. Well, I think that the reason this might not be an easement is because you're relying on these spaces to meet the parking count, right? So if anything, it's going to be something that's going to have to be dedicated to this use. So I would guess that a lease would have to be put into place and potentially a public easement concurrently, not an easement to the development. Yeah. I think it's something we may need to work out, Mr. Chair. I think it's a great question, and I'm not sure it's something we discussed.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily have any issue with it. I just feel like it's just an oddity that, you know, we've certainly ran into other ones downtown where they've talked about leasing spaces recently, frankly.
Right.
In some of our parking areas. So I think it's going to have to be consistent with how we're dealing with some of these other developments that have a similar. Mr. Perlman, did you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, Andy Perlman again for Renaissance Downtown. My recollection with phase one is that we had a Bancroft Street maintenance agreement between the applicant and the city, where we addressed the parking, and I would suggest that we do the same type of thing here on Sanders Street.
Yeah, I think it's something that you guys in the city can work out necessarily. I just think as a board, we probably need to make sure that process gets done, whatever it is. So, so that was a question, one question I had. The other question I had, I guess, was for the engineer. So with regard to the master plan phases, particularly phase 4, which is back on the top of the page here, I guess, right? Have you made provisions of the utilities that are coming down Sanders or the utilities coming down Bancroft, or the combination of the two, set up for dealing with phase 3 and phase 4, so that we're not going back into Bridge Street and ripping it up on those what I call sort of landlocked phases, although I know phase 3 is no longer landlocked because it kind of goes down to the street. But
thanks, Mr. Chair. So
yeah,
for the gas main, like I said, we are extending that to the end of Sanders Street just for potential future expansion.
Right.
And the water main is already to the end of Sanders Street, so we don't have to touch that at all. And then for electric, we're going underground, so they can just tie into what we're doing there. So
yeah,
there shouldn't be any issues.
Yeah, so the capacities and things like that are, I mean, it sounded like you said there was like a 12-inch.
Yeah, it's a 12-inch main. So, and I think the gas line was 6 inches that we're showing. It's pretty big. So
yeah, okay.
There shouldn't be any issues.
I think the discouraging point would be if we were digging back into Bridge Street for the back phases, even though
we shouldn't be doing that.
So, okay. And then the only other question I had is, what's the status of phase 3 and the other building on phase 1? Yeah.
Sure.
Prognosis might be a better word.
Yeah, I'll take that, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I mean, I have built a relationship, and Bob has now too, with Steve Bennett over the years. We actually had an agreement in place for me to help get the additional building on phase 1 built, and ultimately I frankly couldn't get him over the hump on doing it. We continue to talk about it every so often. He's always been concerned, as you know, ebbs and flows with his leasing occurs, as to the frontage and the visibility from the street. So, you know, we had a cooperation agreement in place. Our team spent a lot of time and money actually designing a lot of stuff for him, but he has yet to agree to pull the trigger on anything. In fact, SMC actually even has a right through us to build that building if I can get Steve over the hump. I think it actually cost me some money because I couldn't get him over the hump in time. So we continue to work, is all I can say. But until Steve's willing to move forward, which hopefully, the success of not just phase 1 but phase 2 will help that effort. I mean, I think ultimately the goal was always to keep a lot of his commercial operations, because I think it's a great opportunity again to have kind of that live work environment on one site, especially if someday there's a rail access or whatnot. But unfortunately, I can't make any promises.
Okay. And the building that's held up by the core work, there's no moving forward on that.
No, unfortunately not. No, we could not get the core over the hump on that. There was a lot of things, frankly, that disappointed us when we got to the core. We were trying to push forward waterfront access. Like we had designs and ideas with the boating community to bring, some floating docks and things like that. But ultimately, the Corps, after frankly years of trying to get approvals from them, the only thing they gave us was to build so far, and things can change over time, but the only thing they gave us so far was the ability to build this building up to the levee.
Okay. All right. Other questions of the applicant by the board?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson. Yeah.
My question is for Attorney Perlman. Earlier, when you mentioned the agreement between the city and what to do about Bancroft Street, did that agreement include like winter snow removal?
I believe so, Mr. Peterson, but honestly, it's been some years since I've looked at it, and I would have to confirm, but I believe that it did.
Because I think that's the whole idea behind no overnight parking, especially in the winter. What do we do when it snows? Mr. Chair, I have a question for one of the other applicants.
Sure.
Mr. Porter, earlier you mentioned where in phase one where that building did not get built and you had the dealings with the Army Corps of Engineers. Did I hear you say the word asbestos berm?
You did, Mr. Peterson.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, well, I felt the same way when I heard it the first time. So, but yeah, no, the berm was originally constructed out of asbestos. It has had a lot of changes over the years, but I can tell you for certain, from an environmentalist perspective, that for both phases, we have done extensive environmental investigations on the sites, and actually, to our surprise, specifically on phase two, because that is where the Mansville buildings were at the time. To our surprise, we only found very one spot, basically below 8 feet of contamination near Sanders Street that will have to be dealt with during construction. But we've worked with New Hampshire DES on that and have gotten all our ducks in a row on the plans. Eventually, once we're ready for construction, we'll have to do a ADS work plan to do that work, which is we're not there yet. But we have done the full environmental phase one and phase twos. We provided them the reports. They've given it. We're actually trying to even potentially get them to undesignate the site as a asbestos containing site. And kudos to the city, because frankly, the only reason that we could do that is because before we were ever even around, the city did a very good job of cleaning the site up in the original taking of the site.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Varley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. First, in looking at this email from Wayne Husband, the city traffic engineer, from February 25th, I noted that in addition to the 2 turning lanes we discussed, he also indicated the city is requesting the construction of a signalized crosswalk, and he says Bridge Street near the railroad tracks. So I'm assuming it's I don't know whether that's the sort of western edge. Yeah. And so I was just skimming through the plans. I didn't see it. So I was just curious, is that something you're still working out with the city in terms of the design of that?
That's a great question, Mr. Varley. So when obviously with a project this complex, you go through several rounds of comments. So we've gone through at least 2 or 3 rounds of comments with all staff. And this came about a week or two ago from Mr. Hudson. Excuse me, from Wayne. And frankly, as I had kind of explained a bit earlier when we were talking about the signalization, the D Street signalization in the prior hearing, we would love to put a crosswalk, but we can't find a place to put one. When we had our call with Wayne last week to talk about his suggestion, we explained that we just couldn't put it here because of 2 things. One, it's adjacency to the railroad tracks. So you can't be in a position where you have to stop traffic on a railroad track. And 2, the adjacency to the fire access. So just to be clear, we didn't describe this in much detail, but this entrance point right here that I'm circling is a fire only entrance point. So it'll have bollards that we've worked out with the fire department that you can actually, the fire department, if it's emergent, can drive through. But it'll be signed and bollarded so that no one can access that other than fire trucks. But it is the fire access and the safety access, point number 2 for the site, that was required. So between the railroad tracks and the fire access, there's no safe place to put a pedestrian crossing. And then as you move your way eastward, we have to have turning lanes to keep traffic moving. So then once you bring the turning lanes into the play, you can't actually create a safe pedestrian crossing with the turning lanes. So it really jams us up. And again, like I said, we would love to do that, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to wait until the Taylor's Falls Bridge intersection, which is, it's not directly adjacent, but it's not a mile away. We're talking about maybe 400 or 500 feet down the road, is constructed, and at that point they will have, as we understand, pedestrian crossings to get to the other side of the neighborhood.
Thank you. And then just one other question in this same area, with that designated left-hand turn lane from Bridge Street onto Sanders Street. What is the stacking availability there? If it's I guess the PM peak hours, probably when you're getting the most cars coming in there.
Sure. Brian, could you field that?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Barley. So in the peak hour turning into there's only going to be 22 cars. So it's only a car every few minutes turning in, but there is space for like 4 or 5 cars to be stacked up there. So the odds of that happening are pretty low. So we feel like that was adequate length.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I had for now, Mr. Chair.
Other questions?
Weber.
Mr. Weber?
Thank you. These arrows that you have there, are you planning to make them high temperature arrows, paint?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Weber. So we can probably call out thermoplastic that's what we typically use for arrows like that, so they won't wear off.
Right. That's because of the amount of
tires going over it.
Right. Are you thinking of enclosing the A area due to the close proximity of the street there, Bridge Street? Just in case you have kids there, if you could enclose that in some way so that people who are sitting or eating there, if they have kids there, you're not going to have them running out to the street. Parents should hold their kids, but every little thing helps prevent that. We do that a lot with Dunkin' Donuts, say, and restaurants that when they're close to the street, if they're going to have a sitting area, that they put a small black fencing open so it can be seen, everybody can see it, but it's just protecting young kids.
Mr. Weber, as someone who has a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, I can certainly appreciate that. We were not planning on that. I think part of the reason is that we want kind of direct connectivity to the sidewalks as much as possible. That being said, we could look at that, or maybe the potential plantings.
I just look at it. It's not anything I'm wanting.
No. It's a great point. It's a great point. I don't know, Bob or Brian or anybody else if they have any other comments on that.
Do you guys have any dedicated spaces for Uber and Lyft or any of those kind of situations that a lot of the people today are not looking to drive here and there, and they're more used to taking Uber? So it's something to consider, that you have a dedicated space for Lyft and Uber to get to these places, and people don't have to walk great distances. And that is all I have.
Yeah, we don't, but we do have electric car charging stations.
I hope that your charging stations are type 2, fast charge, because the other ones are overnight. unless people park there overnight, that's one thing, but
Yeah, they are the overnight chargers, and but we don't charge for them. That's the trade-off.
yeah, no, it's great. It's great. It's the ones that, they're the main ones that are coming out are, for like fill-in stations are going to be fast charge, turbocharge.
Right. Everyone has to buy a Tesla.
No, you don't have to have Tesla anymore. There's other ones that now take fast charge.
Right, but the big network pushers are Teslas, right?
It is, yeah. But there's other companies now, EVgo, which is down in the mall. They have fast charge.
Oh, cool, excellent. We'll look into that.
Yep, EVgo.
Other questions by the board for the applicant?
Yeah, one more.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
Either the applicant or staff could perhaps answer my question, and that is, did we get a definitive approval from the Nashua Fire Department about the layout of the roadway and the parking lot in phase 2? I mean, are they happy getting their equipment in and out of there? That's my question.
So there is an email in here which has their conditions of approval. And before the meeting, I did contact the fire marshal's office to see if they were okay for them to proceed with this as a condition of approval, and that they'll still have to work with the fire marshal, and they were okay with them going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Bollinger, did you have something?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, any potential widening on Bridge Street for left turn treatment, it's been referred to as a left turn lane, but it looks like it's actually a two-way left turn lane. So there would be benefit towards the subject property as well as some of the public ways on the southerly side of Bridge, Belknap, C Street, et cetera. I just wanted to make sure that was in fact what was planned.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bollinger. So that is a left turning center lane, so both ways can use it.
Okay, so that'll
be pretty minimal.
Okay, no, understood. And I guess just a follow up to that. Are any of the offsite improvements proposed with the subject development, are those in any way tied into the state project? Obviously, we had a great deal of discussion, about the adjacent parcel. Is the two-way left turn lane something that will be constructed with or without the state project, or is that subject to change as well? I understand there's some flux in the area. I'm just trying to understand, is this real, or is this a function of whether or not the state proposes the same thing?
Yeah, so we assume that this is going to function as its own entity. So this has nothing to do with that project. But the only thing we did take into account, though, was we did use that traffic model to use with this site. So we are taking into account all the correct traffic volumes and stuff like that from that project.
Okay, no, and I appreciate that. Thank you. The only reason I ask is because even though it's a separate entity, if you will, it's a separate project, if you want to call it that, you're probably within the area of influence, is particularly if there is a signal installation, a permanent one at D Street. By the time you taper the lanes back and you meet AASHTO and METCD standards, you're within the influence there. So I don't want you to construct something and have to tear it up a year later because something else was decided for the larger project. Like, yes, they're separate, but no, they're not. Especially when you're talking about the geometrics involved. So I just wanted to make sure. I think at some point, the larger issue is, I think everybody's got to get on the same page with what's ultimately proposed for Bridge Street, the public way, with regard to the larger state project.
I'm Mr. Bollinger, I'm putting an exclamation point next to your earlier comment about contacting DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. I can't remember when I asked your earlier question, Mr. Porter, the Zone 4 development. What was that land's owned by who right now? That's not Bennett back there, right? Or is it all Bennett too?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So that's
So some of it is owned by Bennett.
Yeah.
Basically up until right here.
Mm-hmm.
You can see my cursor. This is all of the Bennett family land.
Mm-hmm.
This small portion right here, I think, is owned by the railroad. It's only a very small portion.
Okay.
I don't think these lines. This is a concept plan or to scale with the actual property boundaries. But
Right.
the majority of Phase 4 is a Bennett land, and this was always planned to be more of a for sale townhome type project. We always felt that once the rental was built, that there'd be a market for a for sale product, especially with riverfront access.
Mm-hmm.
So I will continue to push Steve, and that's hopefully the direction it goes someday.
Yeah. So the railroad property itself is not super developable, if you will, by itself.
No, and I will tell you that when we were involved deeply, I mean, I've been involved in these things all over the Northeast, but specifically here, when we were involved deeply in the rail efforts, we had a lot of communications with the Pan Am Railway folks, and as you can imagine, they are not the easiest to deal with. So we were trying to not be reliant upon them as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions by the board? Okay.
Weber.
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Just one added thing. I am just a question. I know you guys were talking about the sidewalk and because of the railroad, but if just a thought, it may not be able to be done. We had one over at the college over at Riviera College. We had a blinking light put in there for the crosswalking. And you were mentioning that you can't, put that crosswalk because you don't want to have cars stopping on the railroad. But if you put it on another blinking light tied in on the west side of the railroad, and then on the east side on the other side closest to you for the other stopping, that would stop the traffic so it doesn't go stop on the railroad, and you can still have a crosswalk. Just a thought. It's not something you got to do. I'm just saying, just a thought for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Weber. I think actually Dan Hudson had mentioned something similar when we talked about a week ago. I mean, we're still concerned, frankly. A blinking light is one thing, but being able to ensure that somebody actually adheres to the blinking light on the west side of the tracks in order not to cause a backup on the east side that runs into the tracks is we're still concerned about that, frankly.
Well, the one at Riviera is a stop. It is a blinking light, and then it turns to a red light, so that you're stopping the traffic both on both sides of the track.
Understood.
Without having it, and now you have a crosswalk there. I know it's going to set up stuff down the road, tie-ups and things like that, and I would recommend, my own thought is don't do it until you get this roads thing taken care of.
Yeah.
But just, you guys know it. Dan knows how to do this stuff better than I do anyway, any day of the week, any hour of the day, moment of the day. So yeah, I'd prefer, I'd reference back to Dan, let him take care of it. It's just a thought.
Understood.
Any other questions by the board? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and open it to the public. I'm not sure if we have any public, but I'll go ahead and open it to the public, see if there's anybody who has a question or comment. Go ahead and unmute, state your name and address for the record. Okay, hearing none, I will give the board one more opportunity to talk to staff or the applicant while we're in the hearing. Okay. Hearing none. Matt,
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I am slightly concerned about the lack of a real framework for that agreement on Sanders Street. The approval on phase one was basically references a future maintenance agreement. But I just want to make sure we have the right mechanism in place if we're going to put a condition on this. You know, there's a reference in the stipulations as drafted to easements. But if this parking is going to be dedicated to use, I think we need some permanent protection in place. And I'm not sure that a maintenance agreement really covers that. So I'm not sure if it's something the board is comfortable, you know, sort of working up a condition right now on, or if it's something that we need to resolve before approval. But I'm not sure we have a mechanism in place, and I'm not sure if the board would be comfortable from hearing from Attorney Perlman, but I do think we need something to dedicate these spaces to this development.
Yeah, well, my thought is, well, where are we on the parking, the required parking? You're tight, you're only within, this is for the applicant, you're within one space?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Weber?
Go ahead, Mr. Weber.
Is this something that DOT would ultimately handle, or the city?
Right now, the ordinance in the city is no overnight parking on a city street. So there has to be some mechanism to allow that for those to be counted. So if we were, I don't know, Mr. Varley, do you have any suggestions on how you could word something like that would make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is conceptually, I mean, you know, Matt, you had mentioned a lease. I'm wondering, is there any sort of analogous situation anywhere else in the city where, you know, effectively the rights to parking spaces on a public street have been transferred in some way to a private owner? And so do we have anything that's sort of comparable to that?
Well, like School Street, Adam, would be similar. The School Street, we definitely leased out lots. We've done it in lots.
Yeah, that was in the public parking garage, right?
Lots, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know, it's maybe a little bit different, but I'll think Attorney Perlman maybe gonna make a suggestion.
Sure, Ms. Harper had a question first. I'll let her go ahead.
I mean, to me, obviously I'm not an attorney, but you know, some sort of maintenance agreement does seem like a good idea, just, you know, because of the snow maintenance, the liability for the city, and potholes. You know, there's a slew of different, you know, repairs and items that would need to be maintained on this road.
Yeah, and I think to Matt's point, though, the maintenance agreement maybe puts an obligation on the owner to do that maintenance, but doesn't really necessarily address the issue of who has the rights ultimately to the parking spaces. So I think, Matt, you were suggesting maybe we need something a little bit more that affirmatively dedicates the use of those spaces to this development, as opposed to, you know, what would be the default for a public street.
Yes,
perhaps
Mr.
both. I'm sorry. Perhaps
no,
both.
no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think to be clear, I don't think this is a barrier to approval. I just think it's something we need to figure out what the right mechanism is. I'm not sure if Attorney Perlman had something maybe to suggest, but you know, it is inherently a public street. The public will maintain their ability to park there, but you know, the lease would at least protect the spaces. But I think we should probably try to figure a condition out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, I think we can definitely put a condition in there. I'm just wondering if we could, you know, make the condition a little bit more open-ended potentially, you know, in terms of we don't necessarily need to specify a lease, but something, you know, condition that would indicate that we need to, you know, that the applicant and the city would agree upon the appropriate mechanism for, you know, conveying necessary rights in those parking spaces.
That's what I'm thinking, is you make the condition more of a performance than you don't say how to do it, you say what the result needs to be.
Yeah.
I think Attorney Perlman was first, and then Mr. Simmons.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Very simply, I don't recall all the specifics of the agreement that we had on Bancroft Street, but those spaces were included in the parking count for phase one. And I would simply suggest that we replicate that agreement for Sanders Street. And I would suggest that if there is a condition of approval to this effect, that this whatever agreement we come to is approved by the legal department.
Yeah.
We hammered it out with Celia Leonard with phase one. We can do it again here.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is it's just a result-based kind of condition. Ms. Hart?
Thank you.
Just a question, because I don't know the answer.
Sure.
So if these are indeed public parking spots, how can they be included in as part of the parking plan?
Yeah, that's what I mean. They have to be dedicated, kind of like we did. We have done this several times in the past with developments that are next to lots, city-owned lots, and city-owned garages and things like that, which they have to lease a certain amount of. But again, that was a lease. I'm not sure that's the right solution there, but there is definitely precedence for this concept, I'm sure. Mr. Peterson?
So this discussion about an agreement, it's sort of hypothetical, but raises two questions for me. Say there's an agreement, we all know who's going to clear the snow and everything, but where do you put the cars when there's a snowstorm? Then my other question is the fire department okay with that street being lined with cars, or do they prefer that it be open because the width of the road may not be amenable to getting equipment in there? So those are my two questions that I think would need to be resolved at some time.
Yeah, I think the fire department has reviewed the plan, and that's been, and there is the fire access. So I think that part has been decided and reviewed. But Mr. Simmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at my computer, and I don't have the recorded documents, but there is a Bancroft Street use and access agreement between the city and the property, and it is subject to the Bancroft Street maintenance agreement as an exhibit. So those documents have been negotiated with the city and lay out specifically those parking spaces and the maintenance roles and responsibilities. So yeah, those documents are there for the city to review, and I would expect we would execute the same documents here.
Yeah, I think we need to put a condition in here that process gets done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions by the board before I close up the hearing? Mr. Barley, do you have enough understanding of that?
Yeah, I think I've got something here in terms of a condition.
Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. On Sanders Street, I noticed that there was a discussion or a presentation that there's the road work is porous. And just wondering, is that a maintenance item that the owners would be taking care of, or is that something that the city would have to take care of?
I think we're talking about that they're going to have to take care of the whole road, including the parking spaces. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's what the discussion has been.
They being the owners.
Correct.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Yeah. Mr. Bollinger. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This may be food for thought for another application, but I'm just wondering, and I'll put a note out just for the board and for staff. For situations like this, would there ever be a consideration for basically discontinuance of the public right away? I know that's been done, but it seems like it's effectively everything but that. And I understand that legislatively, aldermanically, there needs to be further action taken if that were to be done. But this is effectively turning into a private driveway. And I'm not saying I have a problem with that, but why have 10 different maintenance agreements and memorandums of understanding just where the alderman could make a recommendation to basically discontinue the public way. It's not like discontinuing Amherst Street or East Dunstable Road. You're talking about a couple 100-foot section of road that's basically going to be effectively a private driveway anyway. So again, I'm not trying to necessarily compound the issue here, but at some point, if this type of development, you've basically got two streets that this could be applicable to. I'm not saying we go back in time with regard to the prior agreement that was reached, but just my own private thoughts on the matter. But I'm wondering if there's any thought from that on from staff as to what the complications would be regarding that.
I seem to remember, and maybe Mr. Barley, you remember that. I feel like that came up in the original master planning, and the city for some reason didn't want that.
Yeah,
And,
Mr. Chairman, I can give you a little bit on that,
yeah,
if you don't mind.
sure.
Yeah, Mr. Bollinger, that was the first direction we were thinking of going with all these projects.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when you discontinue a right-of-way legally, half of that road goes to the property on one side of the street, and half of the road then becomes ownership of the property on the other side of the street. So if we were to discontinue the street, half of that road, that the portion that butts the Burnett property would be owned by him, and then we may not build the road. So we would have loved, frankly, to do that, and honestly, that is likely, to your point, a solution in many cases. But it was just not something we had at our disposal here.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, one minor question.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
So at this point in time, phase 4 can't be done until the Burnett property is acquired. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Porter.
Yeah, Mr. Peterson, I wouldn't necessarily couch it as an acquisition condition, because we've always approached the Burnett folks as a partnership approach, meaning that they would put the land in and we'd help them develop the land. So I think it's possible that it could be an acquisition that moves the deal forward. I think that knowing Steve and how he operates for the last 13 years, I would think that if I'm able to convince him that it's worthwhile and it's a good use of that land and it's a good financial investment, that he's more likely to want to be in it than to be out of it. But it's undetermined as to the structure at this point. But really, yes, I think your point is taken that it's really up to Steve to want to move forward in his family.
All right. Anything else before I close the hearing?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Linda.
if you decide to approve it this evening, stipulation number 8, we did receive updated comments from engineering, so the date should be February 26, 2021. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right. Mr. Perlman.
Thank you. I would just note for the record that we have a letter of support from Tim Cummings and the BIDA for the record.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any other hands. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. Yeah, detailed discussion I think is useful. I personally think it's nice to see the master plan taking shape. Love to see the whole plan take shape, as we kind of move forward. And obviously there's a lot of connection into the Bridge Street intersections and things like that, but I know there's a lot of folks working on that as well. So I'm kind of confident this whole development is coming together as well as it can. I'm definitely interested in any comments, any discussion that the board wants to make. Mr. Riley?
Mr. Chair, I'll just echo your comments. I mean, obviously, you and I have been here since the beginning of this project, and I know it's been a long time in the works, and it's great to see this next phase. And I agree with you. It would be great to see the whole thing built out at some point. I know Mr. Porter would love to see that as well. But I think the first phase, has turned out really well, and really look forward to seeing the second phase getting built.
Okay. Other comments from the board? Mr. Peterson.
Comment. I like the concept of the entire project. It's encouraging to hear that phase 1 has been a success. Phase 2 looks nice. One thing that I am a little bit concerned about is, we are trying to become a multimodal society where we're not totally dependent on cars. And parking at this particular site is tight, and it's not pedestrian friendly. You can't even cross the street, with the aid of a light at this point. There's no plan for that. However, we need housing, and it looks like it could be a really nice place to live. But you wouldn't want to be a pedestrian-only person. You seem like you need a car if you live there. That's my thought.
Sure. Okay. Other comments? Mr. Ballinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Mr. Peterson's comment, I would agree with him, and I would also like to let folks know that if you're interested, I would imagine, because there's state funding involved, this will go, the larger project, fixing the X, will go to a public hearing at some point. That's not going to be done in a vacuum, and I would imagine if it hasn't happened yet, there will be some opportunity for the public to comment on what's being proposed out there. So that may be an opportunity to bring up those concerns. So I think that's a decent point. Following along the same line, Mr. Chair, I don't have any particular issues with this, but because of possible funding situations involving this application and the one immediately to the east, I am going to abstain from a final vote on this matter. But I overall have no issues with what's being proposed. So thank you.
Okay. Other board comments, Mr. Weber?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that Nashua Regional Planning Commission does work on, and probably be heard on this particular, and the road work that's going to be done, is complete streets. I believe that the DOT automatically looks for ways to boast public buses and biking, and promotes it. And I think that that's what they'll be doing when they come to the doing work on that X project. So I wouldn't let it ride just on the applicant. I think the DOT is going to take care of that. So I love the project that they've done, everything they've done before. I've visited the site many times, and I think it's a very clean and really nice looking thing. And I look forward to seeing the rest of this.
Okay. Other comments?
One more.
Sure, Mr. Peterson.
I'm wondering, at this point in time, does the city of Nashua have a bus stop near there that, people can hop on a bus and go downtown?
I don't know if they do. I know the development has built one, and it's kind of up to the city, I think, at this point, as far as I know. I know we're close to the applicant, but maybe Matt or Linda can talk. I think it's really up to the city to get that route squared away at this point, right?
Yeah, and the proposed development does contemplate an additional transit stop there. So there's, the provision is considered in what's being proposed by the applicant.
Yeah. So, but yeah, your point, Mike, is well taken. The city should do that quickly.
Yep. And the applicant has worked closely with the transit department through the pre-application review process to identify this as a potential stop. So hopefully that does in fact happen.
Yeah, great. Good point. Anybody else? If not, we'll take a motion. Mr. Varley?
Chair, I would make a motion to approve new business project A20-0157 site plan City of Nashua owner, Renaissance Downtowns at Nashua LLC applicant, site plan for mixed use development. And that motion for approval is based on a finding that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D and section 190-23F. And that approval is going to have a total of 20 stipulations. And the first 4 of those stipulations are all waiver requests. The first from section 190-193A, the second from section 190-208B2, the third from 190-279EE, and the fourth from section 190-279CC. And those waiver requests will all read is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Stipulations 5 through 7 is written in the staff report. Stipulation number 8, I would just amend to change the date to February 26th, 2021. And then stipulations 9 through 19 to read as written in the staff report. And then finally, I would add a new stipulation number 20, and that's stipulation to read prior to the issuance of the final certificate of occupancy, the applicant in the city will reach an agreement with respect to the use, access, and maintenance of the parking spaces located on Sanders Street. Any such agreements to be approved by the city's legal department.
Okay, great. So we have that motion by Mr. Varley to approve with the 20 stipulations as stated. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? Mr. Hudson.
I'm just curious about the timing of stipulation 20. So that was prior to the final certificate of occupancy. I'm assuming we can reach some agreement that's going to solve these issues and define them. But can that go as long as occupying everything other than the last one? I mean, should that be moved up earlier in time? Is my question.
Yes.
Might be helpful for the applicant, frankly, because it gets the city to buy off on it earlier, right?
Yeah, and that's fine. So what,
Mr. Varley?
and what would you suggest is what
Perhaps issuance of building permit, maybe.
Okay.
I don't know if that's too aggressive or.
Building, it's good.
There's only 3 choices, right? Me signing it, building permit,
or
occupancy. So building permit's in the middle, so. Yeah. Okay.
About prior to first CO.
What's that?
About prior to the first CO?
Oh, the first certificate of occupancy.
Right, yeah, that's true. That's fine. We could say
Yeah,
that
that's a good-
first.
Okay, yeah. That way.
Dan and Matt, how is that, you guys
I'm
okay?
satisfied. I'm
Yeah.
satisfied with that.
Okay. So I will, given those suggestions, I will amend my original motion for the sole purpose of changing stipulation number 20 as I added to say prior to the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy.
Okay. Mr. Weber, would you second that still?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion by the board? Okay, let's get a roll vote on that, please.
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Abstain?
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And that motion passes 7-0, 1 abstention.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, folks. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, so for the board, we only have one thing left on the agenda, just a review of the tentative agenda for proposals of regional impact. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at that? Want to make a motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yep. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that there are no projects of regional impact based on the February 16th, 2021 technical review meeting.
Okay, so we have that motion. There are no proposals of regional impact by Mr. Bollinger. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Peterson. Any further discussion? Okay, can we get a vote on that, please? Roll.
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Dan Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
That motion passes 8-0.
Okay, any further discussion items for anybody?
Yeah. I'd just like to mention,
Peterson.
Linda, that was a very clever solution you came up with to move the project along. Thank you.
Want the meeting to end.
Mr. Weber, did you have something?
Yes, one of the things that our NRPC is doing, they're having a number of like workshops and ideas that are coming forth, and it's not just about road work. And we do have, and I'm sure Matt would know about it, that we do have a number of projects that are road work projects that are coming in and things like that. But an interesting thing is understanding this new thought of bringing in electric buses, school buses. And I talked about that. I think I've talked about that, but it's an ongoing workshops that or seminars or whatever you want to call them, informational things. And I'm trying to stay on that so I can pass it along. But if anybody's interested in, just visit NRPC and you can see about electric buses. A lot of things, kids now, the reason for electric buses, diesel, there's a lot of old, it actually costs less to use an electric vehicle, bus rather, and it's proven and it's showing, and there's going to be a pretty big one that's coming up with a lot of people talking about it. So I'll try to keep people informed, and it might, information.
Great, thanks. Matt?
I was just going to add that I know the board will have busy agendas for the next few months based on the caseload that we have, but it might be worthwhile to have Julie Chismis, the city's long-range transportation planner, potentially come to the board one night and talk about the projects that are in queue through the STIP and other transportation planning projects that we're working on. I think that kind of information would have been helpful for the discussion about the Bridge Street project tonight. So it might be worthwhile just to have a 30-minute intro from her to what's currently in the transportation project list. So I'll try to keep that in the back of my mind moving forward. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. The only other discussion item I'd put is just folks keep in mind, we do have a project coming up, the Nashville Landing one that's pretty significant down by the river. It's likely there's going to be a planning board site walk for that project prior to our jurisdictional meeting. So we'll be coordinating that with you folks, but that we're intending to do that for that project, just so everybody knows that. So
one more thing.
Go ahead, I'll start with Ed and then Bob. Yeah.
Thank you. This is for Dan. One of the things that Dan Hudson, this is one of the things that I brought up tonight, and it might be able to be done in engineering is the use of this high temperature plastic is something that might be a good idea, that engineer actually comes through, and because I could miss it, I could miss it, but it's something that high usage places and things like that. Is that something that you normally would just make sure that the applicant would put that in, that they're going to use high temperature the plastic paint for their arrows and things like that, so that it's a city street, they don't come back and now the city has to repaint it. So
yeah, no, it is something that's pretty standardly applied for your symbols in the roadway, as well as your stop bars and then lane lines in close proximity to intersections. Those places that paint gets a lot of turning movements over them, tends to wear out paint quickly. So yeah, and crosswalks also. So it is something that we do look for, and and comment on.
No, I
But
mean,
yeah, I do appreciate you bringing it up every time, and something we can incorporate in our reviews.
yeah, I'm just saying, before it gets to the board, make sure that that they would they would stipulate it and put it in there, and I think that's is necessary so that the city doesn't come back and have to paint it within 5 years when it could last a good deal longer.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Bob, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned it before I did, and while I didn't feel that it went to the level of regional impact, I think the landing development or developments are fairly significant. There's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of meetings about improvements with regard to Daniel Webster Highway. I would really like to see this applicant, if this application comes forth, doing their due diligence with respect to traffic analysis. Even if this is just a relocation from the existing site to a new location, I'd hate to go through another scenario potentially. Well, things are horrible. Here's 20 grand. Thank you very much. Like, I'd actually like to see some full engineering. Tell us what the problems are. And I imagine this is being worked out at staff level to some extent, but I would like to hope that things are being scoped, some parameters are being put forth as to what this applicant would need to do, and that they're. I'm not complaining about money, but sometimes money doesn't do it all. We need to really identify what the issues are, and I do have concerns about whether the intersection at DW Highway and Spitbrook can handle this additional traffic load. So, thank you.
Great. Okay.
I just to that point, I would just note that a comprehensive traffic study has been submitted for that project, and it's our intention to actually have that independently reviewed by a third party. So we're gonna take the traffic issue seriously for that project, and beneficially, you talk about some contributions for other developments have made. We received the contribution very timely for the 292 Daniel Webster Highway, and we've taken that to the Board of Public Works for approval of camera, and that's going to go up. We have also taken for approval camera at DW Highway Spitbrook Road to replace that camera system, and that was through existing quarter funds. So we took that for approval. So in both those locations, cameras will be going up soon, and we expect you'll see improvements just in the operation of the intersections. As I said before, we have some aging equipment on DW Highway, and certainly there's a lot of traffic and there's problems related to that. But it's made worse by the fact that we have failing equipment that's not even operating as it was intended to do. So we are taking steps and taking measures, and we will be, as I said, looking at traffic closely for the National Landing project.
Yeah, and to your point, Bob, I did make a suggestion to the staff that we'd want the third party traffic engineer to be at our meeting. Yeah, so okay.
One more thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I just Googled Nashua, the landing. Are we talking about 1 Chestnut Street, or is this some other project?
No, it's listed in the technical review meeting. You can take a look at the minutes there. Yeah.
I'll check it out elsewhere. Thank you.
It's in there. Yeah. I don't know that. Remember the address. Okay.
2 East Spitbrook Road. It's the former Dow chemical site.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So behind Best Buy and all the way down the river. Yep. So, okay. Anything else? Or are we ready for take a motion to adjourn? Anybody want to make that?
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right. So we have a motion to adjourn by Mr. Weber. Can we get a roll vote on that, please?
Mike Peterson,
Yes.
Scott Leclaire,
Yes.
Adam Barley,
Yes.
Maggie Harper,
Yes.
Ian Hudson,
Yes.
Ed Weber,
Yes.
Bob Bollinger,
Yes.
and Larry Hirsch.
Yes.
And the motion passes 8-0.
Okay. Thanks. We're adjourned at 10:24.